Hey everyone, wherever you're watching from, maybe late at night in the US, maybe early morning in Canada or the UK, maybe you're curled up somewhere quiet. Thanks for clicking in. If you enjoy slow, calm history told in a soft human tone, feel free to tap like, drop a comment, or subscribe. I genuinely love reading what you write. It always feels like we're sitting together, sharing a quiet moment while the world gets a little slower. So, settle in. Take a breath. Tonight we drift back into the creaking wooden world of the early 1700s. The thick salt air, the heavy ropes, the way the deck groaned under changing tides. Life aboard a pirate ship wasn't exactly what the movies show. It was stranger, more structured, more human. And sometimes the rules were the only thing keeping men alive. But before we settle fully, let me guide your imagination somewhere specific. Imagine the lantern light on a dark sea, a tiny ship rolling gently, shadows moving between the masts, and one sound, just one that doesn't fit. Something you can't quite see yet, but you can feel it. A moment suspended. Something out there in the dark. Now, let's begin. Life aboard a pirate ship in the early 18th century, during what historians later called the Golden Age of piracy, was a blend of harsh survival and surprising order. Most of these men, and a few hidden women, weren't born pirates. They came from merchant ships, naval backgrounds, plantation labor, or even coastal towns where poverty pressed too hard on their ribs. Many were sailors who had been underpaid, abused, or forced into the British Navy where conditions could be brutally strict. When a pirate crew stormed a merchant ship and offered, "Join us or go back to that life," it wasn't a difficult choice for a lot of them. Aboard a pirate ship, democracy, rough and salty as it was, became the backbone of their world. It didn't come from idealism. It came from necessity. Men who risked their lives together wanted fairness, because unfairness in a closed wooden world made tempers explode, made blades come out, made the whole ship dangerous. So they created rules, written or spoken, called articles. These articles could differ from ship to ship, but they tended to focus on equality of loot, voting rights, discipline, compensation for injuries, and the absolute authority of one man only during battle. Outside battle, the captain wasn't a king. He was more like a respected manager. If he abused his power, the crew could vote him out. Imagine the feeling of that. Being a sailor who had spent years under captains who could beat you, starve you, or imprison you with no consequence, and suddenly finding yourself in a world where your voice mattered. The hum of that freedom had a strange calm to it, a dangerous calm, because with freedom came responsibility. Every man's choice could shift the direction of the entire voyage. Daily routines on a pirate ship weren't glamorous. At sunrise, the deck woke with slow, aching movement. The smell of dried salt, sweat, tar, stale bread, and wet wood mixed in the air. Pirates slept in hammocks, hundreds of them swaying in tight spaces where privacy didn't exist. They rolled out half awake, bones stiff, hair tangled, grabbing for their clothes. A shirt, breeches, maybe a worn vest or a coat taken from some captured vessel. Some carried keepsakes. A ring, a scrap of cloth, a small carving. These were reminders of a world they had left behind, or a world they hoped to see again. Food wasn't good. It was whatever survived. Tough salted beef, rock-hard biscuits full of weevils, dried peas, rum, and water that turned thick and sour over time. But they made do. Some crews roasted fish caught on the way, or stole livestock when they took a ship. The clatter of knives on wooden boards, the scrape of mugs, the low murmur of tired voices, all of that folded into the morning rhythm. And discipline, real discipline, wasn't the chaotic punishment you might imagine. Yes, pirates could be violent, but their system of justice was more predictable than that on legitimate ships. Theft from one's own crew was one of the greatest crimes. Cheating another pirate of loot, also unforgivable. Fighting on board could end in wounds, but murder of a shipmate was treated harshly because they needed each other to survive. Some ships used marooning as punishment, dropping a man on a barren island with nothing but a little water and a pistol. Others used whipping or forfeiture of pay. Even the cruelest punishment served a purpose. Keep the ship steady, keep the crew united, keep fear where it needed to be. During sailing hours, men climbed the rigging barefoot, carrying their weight with practiced balance. They adjusted sails, scrubbed decks, repaired torn canvas, patched leaks, sharpened weapons. The sea didn't care who they were. Storm winds shook everyone equally, and any mistake, any small slip of rope or wood could cost a life. The ship became a floating world held together by rope knots, discipline, and the strange form of democracy that made pirates different from other seafarers. But underneath all this structure, there was always tension, an unpredictable tension, because a pirate ship wasn't just a workplace. It was a place haunted by the possibility of sudden violence, ambush, revenge from governments, storms, starvation, mutiny, or disease sweeping through the hammocks. The boundary between calm and chaos was thin, almost invisible. You could feel it in the way the crew moved at night, how they listened for sails on the horizon, how they slept with weapons in reach, how their voices dipped when speaking of certain captains or certain battles. And on one particular morning, one will drift into slowly, there was something different in the air of a certain pirate ship, a shift that the men felt before they fully understood it. Something that made them glance toward the dark water behind them. Something that whispered of a change coming. The morning light eased itself across the deck, soft and slow, as if it understood the rhythm of the men who lived beneath it. They weren't early risers by choice. They rose because the sea demanded it, because the creaking of the hull and the shift of the tide had their own way of tugging people awake. On this ship, the Defiance, the crew stirred with the same weary familiarity they always did, rubbing sleep from their eyes, stretching sore arms, reaching for their belts and boots. Yet beneath the usual routine there was a faint unease, the kind that settles into the wood before it settles into the mind. Some of the men exchanged glances, quiet ones, the kind you only give when you sense something you don't yet have words for. The night watcher, a thin, sharp-eyed sailor named Briggs, moved down from the quarterdeck with a stiffness that didn't come from tired bones. He had spent the long hours listening to the sea breathe around them, and he had heard something, though he hadn't spoken of it yet. The cook, old Maddox, rolled open his barrels and crates with the same grunts he made every day. He had 2 cracked teeth, a left knee that didn't bend right, and a laugh that could shake a table. But that morning he was quieter than usual as he scraped a hardened lump of beef and dropped it into a pot. The smell drifted across the deck. Salty, sour, a little smoky. It wasn't pleasant, not at all, but it was familiar, and sometimes familiarity was enough. Down by the rail, 2 younger pirates cleaned their pistols. They had been taken from a Spanish ship weeks earlier, along with a few crates of gunpowder and a chest of coins. The coins had long since been added to the ship's strongbox, guarded by rules stricter than anything a Navy captain ever wrote. Loot distribution was sacred. Every man had the right to vote on how the spoils were divided. Every injury was compensated based on severity. A missing arm meant a large share increase, a missing leg even more, lost fingers or eyes earned smaller compensations. It was harsh arithmetic, but the rules were clear, and clarity kept order. The captain, Elias Thorne, stood near the stern, quietly watching the horizon. He wasn't the largest man on the ship, nor the loudest. He didn't need to be. He had won his captaincy through a vote, and he kept it through steady leadership and a temperament that could shift from calm to commanding in a heartbeat. His coat was weathered, the edges torn, the buttons mismatched from a dozen raids. But his eyes were sharp, always tracking the sea, reading the light, reading the wind. A pirate captain didn't rule by fear. Fear toppled captains. He ruled by trust, and trust was fragile. Elias Thorne understood that like he understood the tide. Predictable in pattern, dangerous when ignored. He ran a hand along the railing, feeling the salt crusting in tiny ridges. The Defiance had been battered by storms, chased by privateers, struck by cannon fire more than once. She carried scars across her hull like a living thing, and the crew respected her because she had kept them alive in places where lesser ships would have splintered apart. Mid-morning brought the usual tasks: patching sails, cleaning weapons, checking the rigging for frayed lines. The bosun barked orders in a rough voice, but there was no cruelty behind it, only routine. Pirates didn't answer to whips the way Navy sailors did. They answered to the agreement they all signed, the articles, and to each other. If someone shirked their duty, the crew handled it. If someone disrespected a fellow pirate, the issue wasn't settled by rank but by decision, by vote, sometimes by duel. But most days there was no need for any of that. Most days the ship simply lived. But that morning, the tension kept tapping quietly at the edges of their movements. Voices were a little tighter. Jokes were a little thinner. Even the sea sounded different. More hollow, as if it were holding something back. It was Briggs, the night watcher, who finally walked toward Captain Thorne. He didn't want to speak up in front of everyone, but the pressure inside him had been building all night. When he reached the captain's side, he cleared his throat. "Sir," he murmured, though he didn't need to call him sir. Titles weren't required unless a man chose to use them. "I been hearin' something out there." Elias turned his head, not alarmed, but attentive. "What kind of something?" Briggs hesitated. His hand twitched slightly as he gripped the railing. Like an echo. Almost like oars, but far. Farther than they ought to be heard. And not steady, like they were stoppin' and startin'. The captain's gaze drifted toward the dark blue stretch of morning water. Oars meant another vessel. But oars stopping and starting. That meant uncertainty. Following. Searching. Hesitating. "Why didn't you call it sooner?" Elias asked, not accusing, simply seeking clarity. "Didn't want to rouse the men unless I knew it weren't the sea playin' tricks," Briggs replied softly. "But it didn't sound like tricks." The captain nodded, thoughtful. Then he raised his voice. Not loud, but firm enough to draw the attention of the nearest dozen men. "Keep your eyes open today," he said. "There may be a ship tailing us. No panic. Just watch." A few men stiffened. A few exchanged glances. But in the world of pirates, being followed wasn't unusual. It was the uncertainty that made the air colder. The kind of uncertainty that spread through a crew quietly, like fog rolling in. As the day wore on, the wind shifted slightly, carrying with it a faint scent, one none of them could immediately place. Was it smoke? Was it tar? Was it something from another ship riding a distant current? No one could say for sure. But things like that unsettle sailors more deeply than storms sometimes. Because storms are honest. Strange scents are not. And as the afternoon sun began to sink, the waves behind the Defiance rolled in a pattern that looked disturbed. As if something large was cutting through the water far behind them, too far to see. But close enough to change the surface. The men didn't speak of it openly, but they felt it. The light settled into that late afternoon gold that made the sea look almost gentle, almost soft. But the men aboard the Defiance knew better. When the water looked too calm, too smooth, it meant the world was holding its breath for something. Sailors lived by details. Tiny shifts in wind, odd ripples on the surface, a gull flying where no gull should be. These were the signals that told them more truth than any set of charts. A few of the crew leaned quietly on the rail, gazing back over the wake stretching behind them in a long white-tipped trail. At first glance nothing seemed out of place. But if you stared long enough, there was a rhythm in the water that didn't belong. A pattern that didn't match the wind, didn't match the ship's movement, didn't match anything the sea itself would do on its own. And sailors noticed things like that. Even the ones who pretended they didn't. One of the older crewmen, Jonas Pike, stood with his arms crossed, his jaw working in slow tension. He'd been a sailor long before he'd turned pirate, serving on merchant ships where the pay was low, the captains were cruel, and the rats were often fatter than the crew. He'd seen storms that snapped masts like twigs, seen hulls torn open by reefs, seen men vanish overboard in the black of night. But there was something about this evening that made the hair on the back of his neck lift. He spat over the side, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and muttered, "Sea's speakin'. Men just ain't listenin' yet." Nearby Maddox, the cook, shuffled to the deckhouse carrying a battered pot that clanged softly with each step. The scent drifting from it was rough. Salted meat boiled down until it lost any softness, peas swollen and split, a thin broth thickened only by time. It wasn't delicious, but it was warm, and warmth mattered more than taste on a ship where nights could feel colder than the wind itself. Men lined up for their portion, dipping wooden bowls into the pot, blowing across the surface before taking a swallow. The sound of eating on a pirate ship wasn't polite. Slurps, grunts, the scrape of spoons. But it grounded them. Routine steadied nerves when the unknown crept too close. As they ate, talk finally began to drift across the deck. Not loud, but enough to carry in the evening hush. "Think it's a Navy ship?" one asked, keeping his voice low. "Maybe," another replied. "But navies don't hide. They want you nervous. They'll show a mast before long." "A merchant ship then." "Merchants don't follow pirates. They run." Someone else leaned in. "Could be another crew. Maybe someone we crossed once." That possibility made a few shoulders tighten. Pirate grudges were long-lived, and vengeance sailed patiently. But no one said aloud the thing they were all quietly thinking. That maybe it wasn't a ship at all. The sea had more secrets than men did. Strange currents, drifting debris, creatures beneath the surface that made the bravest sailors uneasy. Sometimes the ocean played tricks, and sometimes it didn't. The daylight thinned. Lanterns were lit. The ship glowed with soft, flickering warmth, the kind that made shadows dance across the planks. Some of the men moved to their evening tasks, coiling ropes, adjusting knots, checking their blades. Others simply sat and let the rocking of the ship ease the stiffness from their bodies. Captain Thorne stood again near the helm, watching the horizon as the sun slipped lower. His mind sifted through possibilities, sorting them the way a seasoned captain does. Quietly, methodically, with no panic. His instincts had kept the crew alive more times than they could count. And tonight, those instincts whispered that something was creeping closer, something cautious, something measuring them from afar. He finally turned to his quartermaster, Rowan Hale, a man nearly as respected as the captain himself. Rowan was broad-shouldered, scarred, with a calm presence that steadied the men simply by standing among them. "Double watches tonight," the captain said. "No alarms unless something's seen clear. I don't want fear running loose." Rowan nodded. I'll see to it." The men accepted the order without complaint. They trusted Rowan, trusted the quiet steel in his voice. Double watches meant vigilance, not danger. Not yet. As night fell fully, the sky opened into a wide, dark canvas sprinkled with stars, bright and endless. The sea glittered beneath them, the ship rocking gently, ropes whispering against wood. The men moved softer now, respectful of the night, respectful of the ocean. Briggs returned to his post as night watcher. His jaw set, his eyes sharper than they had been the previous night. He knew what he'd heard wasn't his imagination, and he wasn't about to let the dark swallow another clue. Hours passed in a slow, steady rhythm. The wind whispered. The sails swayed. The lanterns flickered in pools of warm gold. Then, just past midnight, Briggs stiffened. He leaned forward, gripping the rail, breath held. There it was again. Sound. Faint. Distant. Barely more than a ghost of rhythm drifting across the open water. But he knew it wasn't the waves. Not the wind. Not the ship. It was something out there. Something moving with intent. Not rushing, not hiding, simply following. Waiting for something. Briggs swallowed. His heartbeat slow but heavy. He didn't call the alarm. Captain Thorne had said only if something was seen clear. But Briggs whispered aloud to the empty dark. "You're out there somewhere." Behind him, the crew slept uneasily in their hammocks, rocking in silence, unaware of the invisible presence that trailed them through the night. The darkness deepened. The sea pressed close. And whatever followed, the Defiance drifted with it, patient as the tide. The night wrapped itself around the Defiance like a long, heavy cloak, thick, quiet, and filled with the subtle movements that sailors learned to sense rather than see. Down below, the hammock swayed gently with each roll of the hull, the soft creak of worn rope drifting through the dim lantern-lit space. Men who had spent their lives fighting storms, captains, and fate slept lightly, the way pirates always did, one ear tuned to the sea, one hand never far from a blade. Briggs stayed at his post, eyes narrowed against the dark. The sea at night could fool a man. Shadows shifting into shapes that vanished when he blinked, sounds that rose from nowhere, whispers that came from the water itself. But Briggs wasn't new to this life. He knew the difference between wind teasing the surface and something alive in the distance. Every few minutes he lifted the spyglass, peering into nothing but endless black. The stars shimmered on the water in trembling lines. Their reflections rippled in patterns that normally would have lulled him, but tonight the reflection seemed disturbed, slightly off, as if something beneath, or behind, was cutting through the surface without showing itself. Behind him, the quarterdeck lantern flickered with a tired flame. Briggs felt the light behind him, warm on his back, but the sea ahead felt colder, heavier, as if the night itself were leaning forward. At last, unable to keep the gnawing feeling inside, he stepped from his post and made his way quietly to where Rowan Hale stood with arms crossed, keeping half the deck in his watchful gaze. Rowan turned at the sound of Briggs' steps. He heard everything, even when the rest of the crew slept. "You see something," Rowan murmured, his voice low to avoid waking the man slumped near a coil of rope. Briggs shook his head slowly. "Don't see it, hear it. Feel it. Same as last night, only clearer." Rowan studied his face, measuring the sincerity. Briggs wasn't a dramatic man. He wasn't one for spinning tales or stirring trouble. If anything, he kept too much to himself. So when he said he heard something, Rowan knew it was no whim. "What sort of sound this time?" Rowan asked. "Oars," Briggs whispered. "Slow ones. Pausing, startin' again. Like whoever's rowin', don't want to be heard." Rowan exhaled through his nose, eyes shifting toward the black horizon. He wanted to dismiss it, to say it was the sea playing games, but something in the air tonight told him not to. "I'll tell the captain," Rowan said. "Keep your eyes sharp. If there's a ship shadowing us, we'll know soon enough." Briggs returned to the rail, his fingers tightening around the worn wood. The waves rolled in steady rhythm, like breathing. And somewhere beyond that sound, something answered. Rowan found Captain Thorne at the binnacle, leaning over the compass, reading the faint glow from the lamp beside it. Elias didn't startle or turn sharply when Rowan approached. He simply lifted his head, sensing his quartermaster before he heard him. "Briggs again?" Elias asked softly. Rowan nodded. "He ain't lettin' it go. Same sound as last night. Maybe clearer." The captain's gaze flicked toward the stern, where only the moonlit wake stretched behind them. He rubbed his thumb along the edge of the compass. "2 nights in a row is no coincidence," Elias said. "But if someone's followin', they're seasoned. Too seasoned." "Aye. And patient," Rowan agreed. "Not many bother Tai Lin pirates without making themselves known." Elias considered the possibilities. Navy, privateers, rival pirates. None of them fit easily. The sea behind them was empty, silent, but still somehow occupied. "We hold course," Elias decided. "No sudden turns. No alarm. If someone wants to follow us, let him stay curious. A curious shadow slips up sooner or later." Rowan gave a slight nod, though his jaw tightened in that quiet way men carried worry without admitting it. "I'll keep double watch all night." He moved off, barking a low order to 2 men to relieve another pair. The shift change was subtle, quiet, respectful of the sleeping crew. Lanterns swayed overhead, their glow brushing across tired faces and rough hands. Hours crept toward dawn. Briggs didn't move from his post. His body ached, but he stayed rigid, listening so hard it felt like the sea pressed against his skull. The water whispered and hissed, brushing along the hull in delicate strokes. Far off a gull cried, unexpected at this hour, and the sound echoed with a strangeness that made his stomach clench. A shape flickered on the horizon for only half a heartbeat, a darker patch against the dark sea. He snapped the spyglass up, breath held so tight his chest cramped. Nothing. Just water. Just the night. Just the same uneasy stillness that had been clinging to them since yesterday. But Briggs' heart beat faster now. He wasn't imagining it. Something was following them. Something hidden. Something waiting. The hours dragged until the sky began to lighten, not with color but with the faintest pale mist that signaled dawn's approach. Birds wheeled overhead. The wind shifted, brushing cool over Briggs' face, carrying a scent he couldn't quite name. Below deck, the crew woke to another day of endless sea. Hammocks rocked as feet hit the planks, voices grumbled, tools clattered. The Defiance stirred awake like a great wooden beast. Captain Thorne paced the deck, noting the direction of the wind, the swell of the waves, the stiff posture of Briggs. He scanned the horizon again and again, searching for what he could not yet see. By the time the full morning sun broke across the water, shining gold over the rolling surface, Briggs' nerves were frayed thinner than sailcloth worn by storms. And then it happened. The wind carried something faint, a sound so narrow and distant it almost folded into silence. Almost a soft hollow thunk, 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 like wood striking water. Measured, controlled, deliberate. Briggs' head snapped toward the stern. This time he didn't doubt it. This time he didn't blink. This time the sound was real as the wind in his face. He exhaled one thin, shaken breath. Someone was behind them. Someone rowing. Someone who knew how to hide on the open sea. And that, on a quiet ocean morning, was more unsettling than any storm. All right, settle in again, friends. Wherever you're watching from tonight, just get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's ease right back onto that creaking wooden deck, where lantern light trembles and the sea feels like it's breathing under your feet. Imagine you're standing near the ship's mainmast now. Not quite in the way, but close enough to feel the life of the vessel. The night is settling in, and the world out here feels strangely larger and quieter, even with the occasional thump of boots or the scrape of a barrel being dragged into place. You see the pirates moving with an odd rhythm, not disciplined like a navy crew, but not chaotic either. It's that strange middle ground that made pirate life so different from the stiff rules of the European empires they fought against. And as you watch, one thing becomes clearer. Democracy aboard a pirate ship was not just a novelty, it was a survival strategy. Every man's voice mattered because every man risked his life equally. And as the day fades into purple light, you begin to understand why these rough, wild, sometimes cruel sailors held so tightly to the idea of shared power. Near the bow, close to the carved figurehead, a group of pirates is quietly discussing tomorrow's course. Not shouting, not fighting, just talking almost politely. A few lean with arms folded. Others sit on coils of rope. They were once fishermen, escaped servants, former navy officers, runaway apprentices. All kinds of people who, on land, never would have been allowed to speak as equals. But here at sea, where every storm could swallow a ship whole, where every merchant vessel might fight back, and every decision could mean life or death, equality became a kind of armor. And so, even though the ship had a captain, you'd notice he wasn't giving orders right now. He was listening. Listening like his authority depended on it, because it did. The quartermaster, the second most powerful man on board, stood nearby, arms resting on a rail. He was the balance to the captain's authority, the one chosen to represent the crew if the captain ever acted unfairly. His presence meant the captain could not do anything impulsive or selfish, which happened often on naval ships but rarely aboard a pirate vessel. It's almost funny, isn't it? The men the world called criminals were running one of the fairest workplaces of the 18th century. Their talk tonight is about more than direction. It's about risk. Ahead lies a set of small islands known for hidden coves, but also for sudden storms that could wreck a ship faster than any cannon. The crew has to decide whether the chance of finding fresh water and maybe a prize ship is worth the danger. One sailor speaks up. His accent is Irish, rough but confident, saying he's seen tempests around that area swallow boats whole. Another man, darker skinned with gold earrings, swears that the islands are quiet this season and that Spanish traders sometimes drift close to the reefs. They go back and forth, weighing facts, experiences, memories. It's democracy, but it's also practicality. Because out here, Decisions echo louder than in any courtroom or parliament hall. While they debate, another scene unfolds nearby. The crew's daily routines that define life on a pirate ship more than battle or treasure ever could. A young crewman, barely more than a teenager, is scrubbing the deck with sand and seawater. The rough sand works like cleaning powder, grinding away stains and slime that gather during long voyages. His hands move in steady circles, back and forth, not rushing, not dragging. This was how pirate ships stayed surprisingly clean, even though they lacked the rigid discipline of naval vessels. Clean decks meant fewer infections, fewer slips, fewer injuries. Pirates were wild, yes, but not foolish. A few feet away, an older sailor with sun-beaten skin is repairing a small tear in one of the sails. He hums to himself, slow and tuneless, pushing a needle the size of a dagger through thick canvas. Repair work is constant out here, because the sea doesn't forgive laziness. If the wind picks up and a torn sail isn't patched, the ship could lose speed at the worst possible moment. Everyone knows this, so even the men who love to drink and gamble step in when something needs mending. Life aboard a pirate ship was not predictable, but it was shared. Below deck, the smells change instantly. Up above, everything smells like salt and tar. Down here it's rougher, wood, sweat, old rope, dampness. Imagine walking along a narrow hallway where hammocks swing gently with the ship's motion. The lanterns flicker, and shadows move like they're alive. You can hear murmured conversations. Two men talking about a storm they survived years back, another laughing about a tavern in Jamaica where he lost half his earnings in one night. Someone is carving something into a piece of driftwood. A face, a symbol, maybe a memory of home. Life down here is cramped, noisy at times and dim, but it's also human. These sailors didn't have privacy, but they had companionship. And in a world where loneliness could drive a man mad, the sound of another voice, even grumbling or joking, was a comfort most land dwellers didn't understand. Food is being prepared in the galley. Salted beef soaked in water to soften it. Hardtack that has to be cracked with a knife because it's nearly rock hard, maybe a bit of stew if they managed to catch a turtle or fish recently. A cook with a scar across his forehead stirs the pot with a wooden ladle long enough to be used as a small oar. The heat of the galley is heavy, pressing against your skin, but the smell is warm, comforting, like a reminder of something normal in a life that is anything but. Out on deck again. A pirate with a Spanish accent is fiddling with a battered fiddle, dragging the bow across the strings with a slow, steady sway. The tune isn't lively tonight. It's soft, almost thoughtful. And for a moment the whole ship feels calmer. Even the waves seem gentler, as if the ocean itself leans in to listen. These men, often painted as monsters in stories, had routines that shaped their days. Cleaning, repairing, cooking, talking, even moments of quiet music. All pieces of a fragile balance that kept them grounded in a life of constant danger. And as you stand there, the moon slipping higher into the sky, you begin to realize something. The democracy they practiced wasn't simply about voting. It was about trust. Trust that every man would pull his weight. Trust that every man had a voice. Trust that the ship would only survive if everyone worked like their lives depended on it, because they did. Tonight seems peaceful. But even the quietest nights at sea can shift unexpectedly. The wind can change. The mood can change. A lookout might spot something far in the dark. And something is starting to change now. Though only the sharpest eyes would notice it just yet. Alright friends. Wherever you're listening from, maybe you're relaxing after work in the US, maybe you're winding down in Canada, maybe you're somewhere in the UK letting the evening settle around you. Just take a breath and let your shoulders sink a little. I'm glad you're here again. Your comments and support really do mean a lot. And I hope this next part feels like you're stepping right back onto that weathered deck, hearing the sea beneath you and the soft creak of wood in the night. So let's walk a little closer to the rail, where the planks are cool from the evening air. The moon has climbed higher now, laying a silver ribbon across the waves. The pirate ship sways gently, almost like it's breathing in its sleep. Most of the crew is settling into their nighttime routines, but something subtle hangs in the air. A shift that's just barely noticeable. A few men linger near the bow, leaning against the rail, talking in low voices. Their laughter is quiet, not rowdy the way some might imagine pirates to be. These men understood that nighttime at sea was almost sacred, a time to rest, to recover, to keep watch without disturbing the fragile calm that could vanish in an instant. One of them, a tall, thin sailor with a faded bandana, points toward the horizon, like he's remembering something far away. He tells a story about a storm he lived through years earlier when he served on a merchant ship before joining this crew. His voice stays soft, steady, as if he's trying not to wake the sea itself. Meanwhile, a small lantern sways gently from a beam overhead, casting a warm glow across the wood. You can see how the light dances on the men's faces, sunburned, scarred, weathered, but strangely peaceful in this moment. They're not thinking about treasure, not thinking about battles, just sharing small pieces of their past. And in a life where the future was always uncertain, these quiet conversations meant more than any gold coin. Down near the mainmast, a few pirates are finishing their evening chores. A man with a shaved head and thick beard is coiling rope, looping it neatly with hands that know the motion by muscle memory. He doesn't look rushed or frustrated. He's just doing the task the way he's done it every day the ship has been at sea. Ropes were lifelines, literally, and keeping them in good shape was something every crewman took seriously. A tangled line in a storm could cost lives, and pirates, despite their reputation for chaos, knew the price of carelessness better than most. Another sailor is checking the barrels secured along the deck. Fresh water, gunpowder, salted meat. He taps the tops with his knuckles, listens to the sound, nods to himself. If water goes stale or if gunpowder gets wet, it can ruin everything. Stores were checked constantly because survival depended on it. It's strange, isn't it? The movies always show pirates thinking only of loot. But out here tonight you can see exactly what mattered most to them. Staying alive long enough to even have the chance to find loot. Below deck the mood is different. The lantern glow is dimmer, the shadows deeper. Hammocks sway gently like cradles. The men lying in them aren't fully asleep yet. You can hear soft murmurs, little sighs, a quiet cough from someone deeper in the corner. Pirates slept in shifts, because someone always had to be awake on deck. Night watches rotated evenly so no one carried more burden than another unless he volunteered. Again, that little thread of democracy shows itself, even in how they slept. Imagine walking a little deeper below deck, where it's warm and close. You can smell tar, wood, sweat, and a faint hint of tobacco from someone who rolled a bit earlier. A couple sailors sit cross-legged around a small wooden box that serves as a table. They're playing a simple dice game, whispering bets back and forth. It's not about money tonight. They're betting chores or who gets the first ladle of stew tomorrow. Their laughter is quiet but real. It's these tiny human moments that kept men sane in a world that felt endless and unpredictable. Off to the side, one older sailor is patching his shirt with slow, careful stitches. His hands tremble slightly, not from fear but from age or fatigue. You can see how he holds the cloth close to the lantern, squinting. He hums quietly, almost like a lullaby to himself. For a moment, the pirate ship doesn't feel like a dangerous vessel at all. It feels like a floating community, fragile but real. Back up on deck, the lookout climbs the rigging again. The wood creaks under his steps, and the wind brushes against the canvas above him. He reaches the small platform high up the mast, the place where he'll spend his watch, scanning the dark water for anything unusual. The sea at night looks empty, but he knows better. Shadows can hide ships. Moonlight can blur distances. And sometimes, enemies use the darkness as a cover. So he keeps his eyes steady, focused. Down on deck, the quartermaster emerges from the captain's cabin. He pauses for a moment, taking in the night air, letting the calm settle on him like a blanket. He's thinking, not worried, not stressed, just thoughtful. Quartermasters often carried the burden of fairness. If rations ran low, if a crewman complained about work, if someone broke a rule, it wasn't always the captain who handled it. It was the quartermaster, because the crew trusted him to balance the scales. His authority came from the men, not from the title itself. Tonight, though, he seems relaxed. He exchanges a few quiet words with a sailor sitting on a barrel. Maybe they're discussing the islands ahead. Maybe they're planning how to divide labor in the morning. But their tones stay soft, the way people speak when they don't want to disturb a peaceful night. Farther aft, a pirate with long hair tied in a rough knot is sharpening his cutlass. The metal flashes under the lantern light, reflecting a thin shimmer of moon. He doesn't do it with excitement or aggression. It's just routine. A dull blade is useless in a fight. And pirates kept their weapons ready not because they expected battle every day, but because they knew it could come without warning. And they had seen too many men die because they weren't prepared. Near him, a younger sailor is rubbing oil onto a leather belt, keeping it supple. He doesn't say a word, just works steadily, focused. For many of these men, caring for their tools was the one predictable part of life. Gave them something to hold on to. The sea tonight is strangely calm. You can hear the soft slap of waves against the hull, a soothing rhythm that settles into your bones if you stand still long enough. The breeze is cool but gentle, carrying the faintest scent of something distant. Maybe land, maybe just the ocean's shifting moods. A night like this was a gift, a chance to rest before whatever tomorrow brought. And yet, even in this calm, something quiet, almost invisible, is starting to stir in the distance. The ship is still rocking gently, calm as a cradle, and the night has deepened into that blue-black shade that makes the world feel endless. Most of the crew has settled into their routines, but now, in this moment, there's something slightly different in the air. The lookout high above the deck shifts his weight, leaning forward, not alarmed, just alert. He's squinting toward the horizon as if something has caught his eye, though he isn't certain enough to call out yet. But before anything unfolds, let's step back into the flow of daily life on board. Look over to the starboard side where a group of sailors sits on the deck with a small oil lamp between them. The light flickers across their faces as they share stories. Real ones, not the wild, exaggerated tales people back on land like to imagine pirates told. These are honest memories. A man from Bristol talks softly about the winters back home, how his breath would fog in the air and his fingers would go numb hauling nets before sunrise. Another, from the Caribbean islands, speaks about the warmth he grew up with, how the sea near his home was blue in a way no painting could capture. Their voices stay low, respectful of the night. These men, despite coming from such different places, carry something in common. The ocean has claimed them, shaped them, given them a strange kind of freedom they couldn't find on land. Some of them had been sailors on merchant ships and joined piracy because the harsh discipline was unbearable. Others escaped forced labor, press ganging, or unfair treatment by greedy captains. Here on this ship, they earned equal shares, had a voice, and chose their leaders. That's why these conversations flow so gently. There's no hierarchy in these moments, just men sharing breath and memory. Step a little farther along the deck, where the carpenter, a stout man with strong arms and a quiet face, is checking for weak spots in the planks. He kneels, pressing a calloused hand against the wood, tapping lightly, listening. A ship like this was a living thing, and he treated it almost like a patient. Ships creaked and groaned in different ways, and after enough years at sea, the carpenter could tell the difference between normal strain and the beginnings of a real problem. Tonight everything sounds healthy. The wood is strong. The ship feels like it's gliding on silk. A lantern swings softly overhead as a small gust of wind slides across the deck. It's not strong, just enough to brush the hair of the men standing nearby. One sailor adjusts the line of his shirt, another tightens the knot of his scarf, almost unconsciously reacting to the shift. Pirates paid attention to the wind. You had to. A change in the air could mean weather was coming, or land, or worse, another ship. Below deck, the night rhythm continues. The cook is wiping down his small workspace, humming a rhythmic tune under his breath. The scent of the evening meal still lingers faintly. Salted pork softened in water, maybe a bit of biscuit tea made from soaking crumbled hardtack in hot water to make it easier on the teeth. It wasn't glamorous, but compared to Navy rations, pirate food was often better because they raided ships carrying fresh supplies. Pirates actually cared about what they ate. A well-fed crew stayed sharp, stayed strong, stayed healthy. 2 sailors are still awake near the hammocks. Their voices almost whispers as they carve tiny shapes from bits of wood. One is making a small dolphin, the other carving a simple cross. These aren't decorative carvings, they're reminders. Something to hold on to when storms hit or when days stretched into weeks without sight of land. These objects were tiny pieces of home, even for men who no longer had one on land. A little deeper into the darkness of the lower deck, a man is writing a note, slowly, carefully, with the stub of a pencil. Pirates didn't write many letters because there was often no place to send them, but sometimes a sailor would keep a message tucked away, just in case they ever returned to a port where someone still cared for them. His handwriting is uneven from the sway of the ship, but he writes anyway, stopping occasionally as if searching for a better phrase. You can almost feel the weight of the moment. Someone out there might never read this letter, but the act of writing comforts him. Back on deck, a low whistle cuts through the quiet. A sailor cleaning the edge of a cannon pauses and glances toward the rigging, but the lookout doesn't call out. Not yet. The sound was just the wind pushing past the ropes, a harmless sigh of the ship moving forward. But it's enough to remind everyone that the ocean never sleeps. A pair of pirates walk past, discussing their shares from the last prize they took. Even distribution of wealth was a rule aboard most pirate vessels. The crew elected how to divide it, with the captain rarely earning more than double what a common sailor earned. A shocking contrast to naval or merchant ships where captains became rich while sailors starved. The fairness of pirate systems wasn't moral. It was practical. When everyone benefits, everyone fights harder. Everyone protects each other. Everyone stays loyal. Well, as loyal as life at sea allowed. Near the stern, the helmsman stands at the wheel. He's quiet, focused, his hands steady. Steering at night requires a different kind of awareness. Watching the stars, feeling the pull of the waves, listening to the creak of the rudder. The moonlight reflects on his face, showing calm concentration. He doesn't speak unless spoken to. Steering is a responsibility, and many captains trusted only a select few with it. One wrong shift, one moment's distraction, and the ship could veer off course or worse, strike hidden reefs. Now look toward the horizon. Yes, that faint line in the distance where sea meets sky. It's darker tonight, the clouds spreading thin like stretched cloth. The lookout shifts again, leaning forward, gripping the rigging for steadiness. He squints hard. He's not imagining things now. Something moved. Something faint, low, small. Maybe just a shadow on the water, or maybe not. Below him, unaware of his long stare, a sailor is finishing a task with tar and rope, sealing a small crack in one of the railings. He wipes his brow, smears a bit of tar accidentally on his cheek, chuckles softly to himself. He doesn't notice that the sea around them has taken on a slightly different hue, a deeper shade, as though something far out there is shifting the water. The moonlight flickers when a thin band of cloud slides across it, just enough to change the shadows on deck. Just enough to make 1 or 2 men lift their heads instinctively, sensing it without fully understanding why. Even the rhythm of the waves seems to shift, barely perceptible but different. And up in the rigging, the lookout finally narrows his eyes and straightens his back. There is something out there, something small, something far, something moving with the waves, not against them. But he's still not ready to call down. Just breathe gently. Soften your eyes. Let the calm of the ocean settle into you as we step right back onto that dim, moonlit pirate deck. The night is deeper now, the sky a darker ink, and the lanterns glow warmer against the cool air. The ship feels steady beneath your feet, rolling in a slow, soothing rhythm. Most of the crew has eased into the kind of nighttime quiet that only sailors know. That soft murmur of wood and waves, the occasional clink of a metal buckle, the hush of footsteps moving carefully so as not to disturb those asleep below. But above all this gentle stillness, there's that lookout, high in the rigging, perched where the wind brushes hardest against the canvas. He's leaning forward again, gripping the rope with one hand, shading his eyes with the other even though the moon offers only a faint silver edge. Something out there keeps drawing his attention, though he hasn't spoken a word yet. A good lookout never calls down unless he's sure, because waking a sleeping crew without cause earns a man more curses than thanks. Let's leave him for a moment and walk quietly toward the waist of the ship, where a few lanterns swing slowly on their metal hooks. Here, 2 men are checking the ship's small arms chest. Pistols wrapped in oiled cloth, flintlock mechanisms that must be kept dry at all costs. They're inspecting them not because they expect a fight tonight, but because this was part of routine discipline aboard a pirate ship. Weapons were cleaned, checked, and counted regularly. Even though most pirates preferred intimidation to conflict, they were always prepared. After all, merchants sometimes fought hard, and naval ships fought harder. One sailor lifts a pistol, turning it toward the lantern light. He tests the weight in his hand, nods, then tucks it back in its wrap. His movements are slow and practiced. He's doing this like he's done it hundreds of times. And nearby, another pirate wipes the inside of a powder horn with a cloth, making sure no moisture has snuck in during the humid day. Damp powder could mean a misfire, and a misfire could mean death in a close fight. But even as they work, their conversation is quiet and light. One is teasing the other about how he once dropped his pistol during boarding and had to fight with a boarding axe instead. The teasing isn't cruel. It's almost affectionate. These men depended on each other more than brothers sometimes. Out here, loyalty wasn't sentimental. It was survival. Walk a little further aft, past the lantern shadows, and you'll find the navigator near the captain's cabin. He's sitting cross-legged with his back against the wall, an open map resting on his lap and a small compass in hand. He's tracing routes softly with one finger, around islands, across currents, between shoals. Pirates depended heavily on good navigation, and many of their maps were stolen or copied from merchant ships. He murmurs to himself now, calculating distance and direction for the morning. The sea current has shifted slightly tonight. He can feel it by how the ship leans. He logs this mentally, storing it for dawn. The captain himself is awake too, though he's not on deck. His door is open just a crack, letting a thin line of warm lamplight spill onto the planks. Inside, he's likely reviewing notes with the quartermaster or quietly reorganizing the articles, the rules of the ship that every man agreed to. Pirate captains didn't rule by fear the way movies show them. They ruled by consent. A captain who abused power could be voted out, replaced, sometimes even marooned. So nights like this were when a good captain took the time to understand his crew's mood, their needs, their concerns. Move a bit forward again, toward the bow, where the air feels a little cooler. Here, a sailor sits quietly with a small piece of cloth, patching the knee of his trousers. He's humming softly, the tune slow, repetitive, soothing. The ship's movement rocks him gently, making his stitching sway, but he keeps going. In the dim lantern light, his expression is peaceful. Piracy wasn't constant danger. Most days were spent like this, maintaining the ship, repairing clothes, resting between long stretches of uncertainty. Another pirate near him is gently feeding the embers of a tiny charcoal pan. Not a fire, just enough to warm a bit of tar for sealing a rope. The glow lights his eyes as he works. He touches the rope with care, rolling it, pressing it, shaping it like a craftsman. Pirates had to know dozens of skills: rigging, knots, basic carpentry, navigation, first aid, weapon care. A crew survived by the skill of its members, not brute force. Now, glance toward the dark water off the port side. The surface looks smooth as glass for a moment, so calm it reflects the moon like a silver coin resting on velvet. But then the ship rocks a little differently. Just slightly. You feel it in your feet more than you see it. A long, slow swell moves under the hull. It's nothing dangerous, but it's different. A murmur rises from one of the men adjusting cargo lashings. He pauses, puts his palm flat on the rail, then looks out at the horizon. Not worried, just aware. Pirates lived by awareness. A shift in wind, a strange reflection on the water, A sound carried oddly across the waves. These were the signs that told them whether danger or opportunity approached. Up the mast. The lookout leans out a little further, bracing his boots on the crossbeam. This time, he lowers his head, squinting through the faint haze draped across the horizon. His breath catches for just a second. He sees it again, that same shape he noticed earlier. A darker patch on the water, too steady to be a wave, too angular to be a cloud reflection, but still too faint to call out. Below him, the helmsman shifts his stance. He glances upward, not because he knows anything's there, but because instinct tells him something is subtly shifting. The wheel is steady beneath his hands, the rudder responding cleanly. Yet the air has a taste to it, a mix of distant humidity and something sharper, almost like smoke carried on the faintest whisper of wind. Not fire, not danger, but something. Even the sails seem to sigh in a slightly different rhythm now, the canvas rustling softly like fabric being moved in slow waves. The ropes creak, the wood murmurs, and the whole ship seems to breathe a little deeper. And then, as the moon slides free of a cloud, the lookout's eyes widen. This time he sees it more clearly. Just a glimpse, but enough to tighten his grip on the rope. Silhouette, far, low to the water, moving at the same rhythm as their ship. But not drifting randomly. Something or someone is out there. Now let's pick up the thread exactly where we left off. The real work that defined pirate life. Because every day on a pirate ship wasn't wild action. Honestly, most days were repetition, monotony, physical labor, sweat, and constant vigilance. The danger didn't switch off just because the cannons weren't firing. And this is where the story gets even more real. Because the most powerful challenge at sea wasn't always a naval fleet or an armed merchant ship. It was the ocean itself. If you were a pirate waking up in the Caribbean between 1690 and 1720, one of the first things you dealt with each morning, after the shift change on deck, was the sky. Sailors, especially pirates, were trained constantly to read cloud formations, wind direction and humidity. Not with instruments, with their bodies. The real historical accounts show that many pirates developed almost uncanny weather instincts. They knew when the air suddenly tasted metallic, when the breeze shifted, when the swell rolled too heavy on one side. All signs of an approaching squall or something much worse. And those storms mattered, because pirate ships weren't outfitted like naval vessels. Naval ships had huge crews, organized hierarchies, and the backing of governments. Pirates lived by speed and improvisation. Their ships were often smaller, lighter, refitted merchant sloops that they'd captured earlier in their career. That meant they were fast. Faster than almost any naval ship of the time, but also fragile. A hurricane could tear a pirate sloop apart like wet paper, so daily life involved constant maintenance. The deck had to be scrubbed with holystones, rough slabs of sandstone, and seawater. The rigging had to stay tight, the lines coiled correctly, the sails patched. All of this wasn't optional. If a storm blew in and your ropes were worn or your sails were frayed, you could lose a mast. And losing a mast was often the same as losing your life. You became adrift, unable to outrun enemies, unable to reach fresh water, unable to escape currents that could drag you into reefs. Historical logs and survivors' testimonies show that a shocking number of pirate losses were caused not by battles, but by storms, wrecks, and navigation errors. Imagine yourself barefoot on that deck, sun warming the wood through your soles, your hands rough from rope fibers. The morning work is repetitive, but in a weird way calming. Scrape, pull, coil, tighten, check the knots. And all around you, you hear the creaks of wood swelling with humidity, the occasional snap of canvas when the wind catches just right, and the low murmur of shipmates talking quietly while they work. No shouting unless needed. Pirates weren't undisciplined like movies show. Real accounts, especially those from captured pirates during trials, repeatedly describe pirate crews as alarmingly efficient, coordinated, and surprisingly respectful within their own ranks. Once the basic deck work was done, the task shifted. Some men were on lookout duty, climbing the ratlins to the topmast. The lookout wasn't just for spotting targets, although that was part of it, but for scanning the sea for anything unusual. A patch of discolored water. Could be a shallow sandbar. A strange current line. Could mean debris or a shift in the tide. A plume of distant smoke. Might be another ship. Every tiny detail mattered. Other pirates took on the messy job of scrubbing the inside of the ship. The hull needed to stay clean because mold and rot spread quickly in tropical humidity. Barrels had to be rolled and checked. Powder kegs were inspected constantly. Moisture was their enemy. Damp gunpowder meant useless cannons. So some pirate ships stored their powder in sealed containers lined with lead or thick waxed cloth. True historical writing from the period mentions entire crews being ruined by moisture getting into the powder room. The cook, usually an older or less physically able crewman, boiled breakfast, usually a thin stew or broth. Pirates didn't starve as often as naval crews did, because they stole fresh supplies more frequently. But when times were slow, the food was rough. Salt beef crawling with maggots, which pirates ate. The maggots were protein. Stale biscuits hardened like stones. Dried peas. Sometimes turtle meat or fish if they had time to catch it. And yes, contrary to myths, pirates drank water more often than rum. Rum was valuable, traded, rationed, or mixed with water to purify it. And through all of this, there was a constant underlying awareness. Every day at sea carried the weight of uncertainty. A calm morning could become a nightmare by afternoon. Peaceful sky could flip into chaos. A distant sail might be a weak merchant prize. Or a heavily armed naval ship hunting pirates with orders to take no one alive. Then there were the internal tensions. Even though pirate crews used democratic systems, voting, shared loot, replaceable captains, disagreements still happened. But interestingly, historical evidence shows that pirate ships were some of the most orderly workplaces in maritime history. Why? Because they wrote their expectations down. The pirate articles, their written contracts, governed everything. If someone broke the rules, the whole crew discussed the punishment. It was controlled, predictable, and that structure kept everyone safer. You'd also hear laughter. Pirates joked constantly, partly because humor was a survival mechanism, partly because many of them had escaped brutal, abusive service on naval or merchant ships and were experiencing, for the first time, a strange kind of freedom. Dangerous, unstable, but free. Some sang while they worked. Some carved small wooden trinkets. Some sharpened cutlasses. Some checked pistols carefully, cleaning the flintlocks, adjusting the springs. And while you stand there imagining this, feel the rhythm of the ship under your feet, that slow lifting and falling like the whole world is breathing. The sun is making the tar on the ropes warm and sticky. Someone nearby spits into the sea. A gull calls overhead. The whole ship smells of salt, sweat, and old wood. And in the middle of that calm, one lookout suddenly freezes. He lifts a hand, points to the far horizon. Just a dot, but moving. And every pirate on board slowly turns their head. Because out there, somewhere in that shifting blue distance, something is approaching that will change the entire day. Maybe the entire future of this crew. And nobody knows yet whether it's opportunity or danger. Alright, ease back into that slow breathing. Let your jaw loosen, maybe let your shoulders drop just a little. Because we're stepping right back onto that sun-struck deck, where every pirate has just turned toward that tiny drifting down the horizon. And the mood, that easy rhythm of daily tasks, shifts almost instantly. Not loud, not chaotic, just sharper, quieter, focused. The Caribbean heat presses down, and the wind carries the faintest hint of something changing. Maybe it's just the tension running through the crew, maybe it's an actual shift in the air. But the moment that dot appears, everything becomes more deliberate. One of the historical truths about pirate life, something testimony after testimony proves, is that they were trained observers. They could identify a ship's rigging from miles away. They could estimate its size by the shape of the sails. They could tell whether it was running with or against the wind, whether it was laden with cargo, and even whether it was military or merchant by the way it trimmed its canvas. These weren't guesses, this was survival. So now, picture yourself standing among them. You hear the lookout calling down. Not shouting wildly. just projecting his voice so all can hear. Sail to the east-southeast. One mast moving steady. A single mast usually meant a sloop or a small merchant vessel. And a small merchant ship could mean food, fresh water, spare tools, weapons, even medicine, things pirates desperately needed. But they never assumed. Not when their lives hung in the balance. The captain steps forward. Remember, real pirate captains weren't tyrants. They didn't bark orders for the sake of ego. Their authority existed because the crew trusted their judgment. And right now, judgment mattered. He lifts a spyglass. An actual brass spyglass, polished and well-kept, because optical tools were prized. Through it he examines the distant shape. You can almost imagine the steady rise and fall of his breathing while he studies the sails, the angle, the hull. The sun glints off the water, flashing bright white. The ship is far, but clear enough for an experienced eye. "Looks merchant," he finally says, low and even. "Probably not armed heavy, but we watch." And that's all he needs to say. Because the decision, whether they pursue, avoid, or prepare for battle, isn't exclusively his. This is where the pirate system becomes so unique. Before moving into danger, many pirate crews held quick, informal votes. Not full meetings, just a round of nods or murmured agreements. The quartermaster, who represented the interests of the whole crew, takes in the mood. If the crew wants that ship, they go. If they don't, they pass. It was democracy, but fast, sharpened by necessity. Here the murmur spreads quietly. Should we inspect? Should we pursue? It's been days since the last capture. Supplies aren't low yet, but they aren't overflowing either. And the horizon holds no storm signs. The wind is steady. The ship they spotted isn't outrunning anyone. The decision forms. Pursue. But pursuit wasn't a wild chase. It was careful preparation. Every action mattered. A slip, a noise, a mistake, and the target could escape. Or worse, recognize them as pirates too early and open fire. So the first thing they do is adjust the sails. Pirates were masters of sail handling. Their speed advantage relied on it. The crew begins hauling lines, shifting ropes, swinging the booms into the best angle for the wind. You hear the slap of canvas as it fills, the groan of the wooden masts as they take the strain. The ship leans slightly, cutting through the water with more purpose. The lookout keeps his eyes fixed. The helmsman steadies the wheel. And the crew begins quiet stages of preparation, not for a cinematic battle, but for a calculated interception. Some men check flint pistols, making sure powder is dry. Others ready grappling hooks, not because they wanted to swing like movie characters. That rarely happened, but because boarding a ship often involved pulling vessels together and crossing planks or jumping short distances. A few crewmen roll out small cannons, not to destroy the merchant ship, but to intimidate it. Pirates preferred capturing ships intact. Loot was inside, not in broken splinters floating on the waves. Down in the hold, the gunner inspects the powder kegs again. Even though pirates didn't want to fire cannons first, they had to be prepared. Powder that had drawn in moisture overnight had to be dried or replaced. Cannon tools were checked. Rammers, sponges, wadding. Above deck, a lingering silence settles. Not fear, but a focused quiet. A kind of collective breath-holding. And as they get closer, mile after mile, the shape becomes clearer. The hull is low. The sails are plain. No naval markings. No visible gun ports. That's good. And also suspicious. Because some governments disguised ships to lure pirates in. The captain signals the quartermaster again. They exchange a glance. And now comes an important ritual in pirate life. Showing intentions. If they wanted to approach without alarming the target, they might fly a false flag. A common merchant nation's flag. If they wanted to strike fear immediately, they'd raise the black flag, the Jolly Roger. Though that name wasn't yet universal in the early 1700s. And historically, pirates often didn't raise the black flag until they were close enough that the target couldn't flee. Right now. Too early. So they maintain a neutral flag. Keep distance. Watch for reaction. As the gap shrinks, the crew becomes more alert. You can almost feel the tension in the air, that fine line between opportunity and threat. The water glitters, calm and glassy. The sails ripple softly. A few gulls wheel overhead. Then something subtle changes. The merchant ship shifts its course. Not much, just a small angle. But sailors know the language of angles. A small turn could mean avoiding a reef, could mean adjusting for wind, or it could mean preparing to flee. The lookout narrows his eyes. Quartermaster leans forward. Captain adjusts the spyglass again. "She's running," he murmurs. And when a ship runs, pirates take that personally. The crew reacts instantly. No shouting, no clumsy chaos. Just swift train movement. Sails are trimmed for speed. The hull slices cleaner through the water. The wind roars louder in the rigging. You hear the rhythmic slap of waves against the bow as the pirate ship begins to close the distance determinately. And now the mood shifts again. Not fear, not excitement, but a sharpened energy. This is where pirate skill mattered most. Real skill. Real navigation. Real seamanship. They didn't want to fight. They wanted to force surrender with intimidation and precision. As the distance closes further, the quartermaster steps forward, ready to speak with the crew once more if needed. The captain stands at the rail, measuring every detail. And you, standing among them, can feel the thrill and danger mix into something strangely hypnotic. Because in the next minutes, either that ship will yield, or it will resist. And if it resists, things will get loud. The wind stiffened across the deck as the pirate sloop knifed through the water in pursuit. Every rope strained, every sail ballooned full, and the entire ship seemed to pulse with intention. The fleeing merchant vessel ahead tilted slightly as it tried to squeeze more speed from the breeze, but its heavier cargo-weighted hull couldn't match the agility of the pirate ship built for speed, maneuverability, and sudden violence. The quartermaster walked the deck with calm, deliberate steps, checking the readiness of the men. This wasn't a moment for panic or shouting. Pirates relied on practiced efficiency, not chaos. A few of the crew stood by the swivel guns, small deck-mounted cannons used not to sink a ship but to shred its sails or rigging. They weren't loaded yet. They waited for the captain's orders. The priority was always intimidation and control, not destruction. The helmsman kept the wheel firm, using every shift of wind to close the gap. Real historical accounts describe pirate helmsmen as some of the most skilled sailors of the era, often more experienced than naval officers. Many had served on merchant ships, warships, or fishing vessels before turning pirate. They knew the ocean's rhythms better than most captains. The merchant ship tried another evasive maneuver, adjusting course slightly to starboard. But that small shift told the pirates everything. They weren't dealing with a well-armed escort vessel or a disguised naval trap. They were looking at a frightened crew, likely untrained in combat. Fear made a ship sloppy, and sloppy ships made easy prizes. A few pirates moved to adjust the foresails, pulling lines in synchronized movements. The deck tilted gently as the ship accelerated again. The salty spray hit faces and arms, but nobody blinked. This was familiar, almost soothing, the rhythm of a chase they'd lived many times before. The captain finally lowered his spyglass and nodded. That simple movement sent a ripple through the crew. They knew what it meant. A signal. The shift from silent pursuit to deliberate engagement. The black flag was prepared at the stern. Historically, pirates raised it only when they wanted to send a message. "We are pirates. Surrender quickly and we spare you. Resist and you take your chances." The flag didn't always have a skull and crossbones in this era. It might have been plain black or decorated with hourglasses, spears, bleeding hearts, symbols of urgency and inevitability. But whatever the design, its meaning was unmistakable. The captain gestured. The flag unfurled. And instantly, the merchant crew reacted. You couldn't hear their voices from this distance, but you could see the sudden flurry of movement. Men scrambling on deck, sails tightening, someone pointing. No discipline, no coordination, just panic. Fear gave pirates an advantage long before steel or powder did. The pirate crew moved into their next phase. The quartermaster took his position beside the captain. Some men readied the grappling hooks. Others stayed at the ropes. A few unslung cutlasses but didn't raise them yet. The pistols were checked again. Flints sharp, pans dry. They wouldn't be fired unless absolutely necessary. Pirates didn't like wasting ammunition. They paid for powder with blood and risk. The chase continued for another tense stretch across the rolling blue water. The pirate ship inched closer, its bow wave rising. The merchant vessel strained harder, but it was no use. A lighter, faster sloop like the pirates could outrun almost anything if the wind cooperated. And the wind was on their side today. When the pirate ship reached a decisive distance, far enough to avoid a sudden broadside but close enough for warning shots, the captain lifted his hand. The gunner at the swivel gun nodded and adjusted the aim. They weren't firing at the hull. They aimed for the rigging high above the merchant deck. Controlled burst. Enough to frighten, not kill. The swivel gun thundered. Smoke blasted outward in a gray, swirling cloud. The shot shredded a portion of the merchant's foresail. Canvas whipped loose. The ship shuddered and lost precious speed. A few more seconds, and the pirates were pulling alongside, close enough to see faces on the other ship. Wide-eyed, sweating, terrified. Those faces were the real reason pirates preferred warnings over bloodshed. A frightened crew was far more likely to surrender quickly, leaving cargo intact. The quartermaster cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted across the narrowing gap. His voice carried clearly across the sea air. Historical pirate encounters recorded similar phrases, simple and direct. Heave to. Strike your colors. No harm if you yield. The merchant crew hesitated only a moment longer. Then one of their men, likely the mate or acting officer, threw his arms up and signaled with a cloth. Not a proper flag. Just a surrender gesture. The chase was over. But the job was not. Now came the careful approach. The pirate ship eased in closer, adjusting sails to slow pace without losing control. Grappling hooks weren't always used unless the sea was rough. Sometimes pirates boarded using long planks or by leaping short distances. Today, with the gentle roll of the Caribbean beneath them, a few pirates prepared to cross over cleanly. Boarding was always the dangerous moment. Even a surrendering crew might panic. Even a harmless sailor might lash out. Pirates moved with calm caution, stepping lightly onto the merchant deck. Their weapons remained visible but not raised. The quartermaster took the lead. He spoke first, not the captain. Historically, the quartermaster was the mediator, the voice of the crew, the one who negotiated terms. His job wasn't cruelty. It was order. He asked the same questions pirates had asked hundreds of times. What cargo? Any weapons? Anyone injured? Anyone resisting? The merchant sailors answered quickly. Their voices shook, but they spoke. They carried foodstuffs, some cloth, barrels of water, small trade goods. No soldiers. No hidden guns. That was exactly the kind of prize pirates depended on. Not treasure chests overflowing with gold. Those were rare, sensational exceptions. The real lifeblood of piracy was supplies. Fresh water, edible cargo, tools, medical herbs or tinctures if they were lucky. The pirates began inspecting barrels and crates, working efficiently. No looting in chaos. No destroying what they needed. Everything followed procedure. The articles, the pirate code, required fair division later, once they returned to their own ship. The merchant captain stood shaking, hands raised, expecting the worst. But history shows that most pirates didn't harm surrendering crews. Some even shared alcohol or food. Some told stories. Some gave warnings about dangerous waters or naval patrols. The quartermaster spoke to him calmly, firmly, and made it clear. Surrender saved lives. Behind them, the pirate crew continued searching, cataloging, and preparing to transfer goods. The sun burned high, the water dazzled bright, and the boarding was proceeding smoothly. But as one pirate opened a sealed wooden crate near the stern, his expression shifted. He froze, stared, then looked quickly toward the quartermaster, because inside that crate was something they hadn't expected, something that changed the meaning of this capture completely. The pirate who had opened the crate didn't speak at first. He simply rested one hand on the wood, the other hovering above whatever he'd just uncovered, as though touching it too quickly might shift the fate of the entire crew. The quartermaster noticed the stillness immediately. Stillness at sea was never casual. It meant danger or rarity, or something the crew needed to treat with extreme care. He walked over, boots thudding softly against the merchant deck. The rest of the pirates kept working, but you could feel the subtle change in their focus. Heads tilting, eyes shifting, hands pausing mid-task. They sensed the moment tightening, the air growing heavier around that opened crate. The quartermaster leaned down and looked inside, and his breath drew in just slightly. Not gold, not silver, not weapons, something far more complicated. A stack of sealed packets wrapped in oilcloth, stamped with the insignia of a colonial governor, one whose name was already whispered with caution among the pirate communities of the time. These weren't trade goods. These weren't normal merchant cargo. These were official documents, dispatches, correspondence, government communications traveling between colonies, messages that could detail naval patrol routes, supply shortages, military reinforcements, political negotiations, lists of wanted men, or even accusations leveled against certain colonial officials. Anything written inside those packets had the potential to reshape the balance of power in Caribbean waters. And pirates, especially democratic crews operating by majority rule, understood exactly what information could do. The quartermaster didn't touch the packets at first. He simply studied them, thinking through what history had taught men like him. Government dispatches could mean opportunities, but also immense risk. If a Navy ship had been expecting this courier vessel and it suddenly went missing, patrols might intensify. And if the pirates kept the documents, they might gain valuable knowledge. If they destroyed them, they might erase evidence of secrets better left buried. If they returned them through bribery, they might earn temporary protection. Every option carved a different future. The merchant captain saw the quartermaster's expression and swallowed hard. "It's nothing of value," he said quickly. "Only letters. Only papers. Official business." But in the golden age of piracy, official business was rarely harmless. The quartermaster finally reached in and lifted one packet. It was heavier than expected. Sealed. Important. He didn't open it. Not here, not yet. That decision belonged to the crew as a whole under their articles. Pirate democracy was slow in moments like this. Deliberate, thoughtful, even cautious. The captain of the pirate ship stepped closer, watching silently. He and the quartermaster exchanged a look, not fearful, but analytical. They both knew that documents like these could reveal troop movements, describe incoming treasure fleets, or detail political disagreements between European powers. Pirates thrived in the cracks where governments disagreed. One of the crewmen whispered, "This could be worth more than coin." Another answered, "Or get us hunted to the ends of the sea." Both statements were true. The quartermaster finally closed the crate gently, very gently, almost respectfully. Then he looked to the merchant captain. "You knew what you were carrying?" he asked. The merchant captain hesitated, just for a heartbeat, but the hesitation said enough. Pirates were excellent readers of fear. That pause was louder than any confession. The quartermaster didn't threaten him. He didn't need to. Fear was already guiding the moment. "Are there more? Any hidden compartments?" he asked. No, that's all," the merchant captain stammered. "Please, take the food, the water, anything. But those documents, I must." He stopped himself. The quartermaster's eyes narrowed. "You must deliver them?" he asked quietly. The merchant captain looked down at the deck, unable to speak. Silence rippled across both crews. Because now the pirates knew something important. These messages mattered greatly to someone in power. And something important to someone in power could become leverage. Or danger, or both. The pirate captain stepped forward at last. His voice was calm, even, carrying the steady cadence of a man who'd seen countless such moments. "You've surrendered," he said to the merchant crew. "Your lives aren't in danger. But these crates go with us. Understand that." The merchant captain nodded, defeated. With the decision made, for now, the pirates resumed their organized search. Food barrels were rolled across planks onto the pirate ship. Tools, spare rope, and patches of canvas were carried over. A few pirates inspected the hold to ensure no one was hiding. No weapons were tucked away. No correspondence lay undiscovered. Above, the Caribbean sky brightened, and the wind softened slightly. The sea returned to that rhythmic calm that made even tense moments feel dreamlike. Once the supplies were transferred, the quartermaster gathered the pirate crew on the merchant deck. Historical pirate procedure required clear communication. No one was left guessing. No one was excluded. Every decision affecting their future was discussed openly. "We've taken stores," he said, "and one crate of documents. We'll decide later, once aboard our own deck, what to do with them." A few crewmen nodded. Others exchanged curious glances. Some were already imagining what information might lie behind those wax seals. Then the quartermaster made it clear. No harm to these men. They surrendered fast. They showed sense. A few pirates clapped the merchant sailors on the shoulders in quiet reassurance. One even handed a small pouch of tobacco as a gesture of goodwill. Real piracy wasn't endless cruelty. It was structured, strategic, often unexpectedly humane, shaped more by survival than malice. The merchant ship was left intact, except for one damaged sail. The pirates helped them rig a temporary patch so they wouldn't drift helplessly after parting ways. Navigation directions were given. Advice on avoiding naval patrols shared. And slowly, as the pirate crew returned to their own ship, the two vessels drifted apart on the blue water. But the calm aboard the pirate ship didn't return immediately. Not this time. The crate sat in the center of the deck now, sealed and silent, surrounded by men whose imaginations raced through every possibility. The captain and quartermaster stood before it, knowing the crew would soon gather to vote on what to do. Information meant power. Power meant danger. And danger, well, pirates were no strangers to it. The ship rocked softly under the warm Caribbean sun, but the mood had thickened. Something about those sealed messages felt like the beginning of a new current pulling them forward, toward opportunity, or into the path of something far more formidable than a simple merchant chase. One of the men broke the silence. "Whatever's inside, it'll change things." He wasn't wrong. The horizon burned gold as dawn lit the ragged edge of the Caribbean, and with it came the kind of morning that made every pirate nervous. Quiet, windless, and too perfect, like the sea itself was holding its breath. This was the kind of day when even the most seasoned crews kept their voices low, because history had left enough warnings carved into driftwood, whispered across ports, and buried beneath waves that didn't care who ruled the deck yesterday. Today's story begins with one of the strangest and little-known episodes from real pirate history. The morning the entire crew of the sloop San Telmo's Mercy refused to touch their own ship's treasure, a moment that would eventually be recorded in Spanish naval archives as El Motín de los Almas Perdidas, the mutiny of the lost souls. It wasn't gold that caused the fear. Pirates were superstitious, but not foolish. Gold, silver, jewels. None of that scared them. What frightened them that day was a story attached to the treasure. And that story came wrapped in salt-blackened cloth, locked in an iron chest that was never meant to end up in pirate hands. 3 days earlier, the San Telmo's Mercy had ambushed a Spanish supply brig off the coast of Panama. The battle wasn't much of a fight. The brig was carrying paper goods, rope, flour, and 2 monks who swore they were simply transporting religious materials. The pirates didn't care about religion, but they definitely cared about crates with heavy padlocks and stamped seals. The unusual part: the monks begged them not to take the chest. They didn't plead for themselves. didn't beg for mercy, didn't try to bargain. They only said one thing: do not disturb what belongs to the sea. 4 hardened privateers who'd fought hurricanes, naval cannons, and each other. The fear in the monks' voices unsettled them more than the warning itself. Still pirates steal. It's what they did. Warnings were ignored. Chests were carried aboard. The monks were set adrift in a longboat, still shouting prayers as the pirate ship sailed away. The crew didn't open the chest immediately, partly because the captain, Elias Crow, believed anything locked that tightly had to be worth negotiating. He wanted to wait until they were in open water. But the sea changed that night. Old sailors used to say the ocean has moods. And that night it was angry. No storm. No wind. No thunder. Just a rolling, unnatural swell that made every lantern flicker as if reacting to something that couldn't be seen. The chest, still sealed, began to sweat moisture. Not normal water. Salt water. Like it was leaking the ocean. Some claimed they heard knocking from inside. Others said the wood creaked in a rhythm too deliberate to be natural. A few men refused to sleep anywhere near it. By the next morning, tensions were high. Superstition spreads fast in tight quarters, and sailors who would face cutlasses without fear now wouldn't go below deck without crossing themselves. So Captain Crow did the only thing a pirate captain could do. He opened the chest himself. And maybe he regretted it. Maybe he didn't. History doesn't record what he felt. All we know is what the crew later claimed. Inside the chest was a cracked wooden idol carved in the shape of a man-shaped figure with no face, a bundle of parchment soaked through with seawater, and a large sealed jar filled with black sand that moved like it was alive. Crow ordered the idol thrown overboard, a decision that everyone later said was the moment everything went wrong. That night, the sea went absolutely silent. No rolling, no creaking, no waves. A stillness so complete the ship felt like it was floating on glass. Men reported hearing whispers under the planks. Some claimed it sounded like the monks' voices, still pleading. Others said it wasn't human at all. More like dozens of people speaking underwater. Crewmates refused to stand night watch alone. The ship's cook later said he saw wet footprints across the deck leading straight to the captain's cabin, and stopping right outside the door. When the bosun tried to pour the black sand into a bucket, he said the sand clung to his hands like it didn't want to be moved. By sunrise, nearly half the crew believed the idol had cursed them for removing it from the jar. Pirates loved treasure, but nothing that behaved like that. On the 3rd morning, a group of 13 sailors confronted Captain Crow, demanding the remaining artifacts be returned to the sea. Crow refused, insisting the items were worth a fortune to the right buyer. His exact words, according to the surviving log: "Treasure doesn't curse men. Fear does." But the crew was beyond persuasion. They weren't afraid of battle. They were afraid of silence. Silence meant something was listening. The mutiny wasn't bloody. It didn't even feel like a mutiny. Felt like survival. They seized the chest, the jar of black sand, and the water-stained parchments, dragged them to the rail, and dumped everything back into the ocean. The moment the jar hit the water, the wind returned. Hard gust, cold, like winter breath rising out of the waves. The sea surged. Waves slapped the hull. Lanterns swung violently. And then nothing. Just normal sea again. As if whatever had been waiting below finally got what it wanted. Oddly enough, once the artifacts were gone, the crew felt better immediately. The tension evaporated. Men laughed again. The sea rolled normally. Birds returned. Fishing lines caught actual fish instead of coming up empty. But the damage to the ship's order was permanent. Captain Crow stepped down voluntarily 2 days later. He said a captain who loses the faith of his crew has already lost the ship. The event was recorded later by Spanish officials after hearing rumors from captured pirates, and from the monks who eventually reached land. The account became part of maritime folklore, a rare mix of superstition, history, and genuine fear. To this day, divers claim the sea off Panama sometimes turns strangely still, as if remembering the items thrown into it. Sailors still tell the story. Not as a ghost tale, but as a warning. Some treasure doesn't belong on land. Some treasure belongs to the sea. The storm rolled in without warning, not from the sky, but from the sea itself. The Caribbean was supposed to be calm that late afternoon, a sheet of hammered bronze under the sinking sun. Yet the waters around the frigate Broken Star began to churn as if stirred from below, boiling in slow spirals that made every man on deck step back from the rail. Because every pirate who'd ever sailed the Spanish Main knew one truth. If the sea starts moving before the sky does, something ancient is waking. This is the beginning of one of the strangest real events preserved in British Admiralty records. The disappearance of the Cornish privateer Rowan Yates, and the crew who swore they encountered a cathedral made of bone rising from the sea. Not a myth, not a legend, a documented report written by terrified men who were court-martialed for desertion. The captain, Rowan Yates, wasn't like other privateers. He didn't drink, didn't gamble, didn't womanize. He read. He collected strange maps drawn by sailors who had gone mad on long voyages. He studied currents no one else cared about. He even paid silver coin to deranged fishermen who talked about places where the sea changed color, or sang like a choir. Most captains hunted gold. Yates hunted patterns. His obsession began with a story told by a dying Portuguese navigator who survived 3 shipwrecks in the same patch of ocean, each wreck caused by storms that didn't appear on any horizon. The navigator called the place O Ossuario do March, the ossuary of the sea. Yates wanted to find it, not to plunder it but to understand it. And understanding the sea was the most dangerous ambition any pirate could have. First sign. They were 7 days out of Port Royal when the compasses began to behave strangely. Not spinning, drifting. Like something below was tugging on them. The carpenter blamed iron nails in the hull. The boatswain blamed cheap Spanish metal. The surgeon blamed nervous imagination. But Yates didn't blame anything. He just watched. And when the current shifted against the wind, sweeping the ship sideways without any visible reason, he smiled. He told the crew, "We are exactly where I hoped we would be." Not one man liked the sound of that. The rising. The ocean went quiet. Every rope on the rigging went slack. Even the gulls circling above vanished, as if refusing to witness what was coming. Then the water around the Broken Star began to rise, not in waves but in pillars. Columns of water lifting straight up from the sea as if pulled by invisible strings. The crew backed away in horror. One shouted, "It's the Kraken!" Another began praying in Spanish. But what rose wasn't a creature. As the water drained away, something pale and vast emerged beneath it. Curved spires, smooth arches, rib-like beams. It looked like a building. A cathedral-sized structure made entirely of bleached bone. The men swore the bones were not whale-sized, but larger, much larger, like ribs from something the size of an island. The thing rose only a few feet above the water, enough to show its shape. A circular structure with a center chamber and spiraling corridors. Yates stared in awe. The crew stared in terror. 'Cause no natural reef looked like this. No wrecked ship had ribs that huge. And bones do not assemble themselves into architecture. The descent. As quickly as it rose, the structure began to sink. Not falling, descending, slowly, deliberately, as though it were alive. Yates ordered the longboats lowered. The crew refused. He shouted. He threatened. He pointed pistols. Only 3 men, his loyal quartermaster and 2 desperate sailors, joined him. The rest watched from the deck, refusing to put a single oar in that water. The longboat rowed toward the sinking formation, which hovered just inches below the surface now, shimmering like a ghost. Yates reached out and touched it. And the moment his fingers brushed the pale surface, the ocean exploded. A ring-shaped wave shot outward, slamming the Broken Star so hard the entire crew was thrown to the deck. Lanterns shattered. Barrels rolled. A mast rope snapped like a whip. When the spray cleared, the longboat was gone. Not overturned. Not broken. Not drifting. as if swallowed whole. What returned? At dawn the next day, the sea was calm again. Come. The men searched, shouting names, lowering grappling hooks, scanning the horizon. Nothing. But then, just before sunset, the lookout screamed. A single longboat drifted toward the ship. Untouched. No cracks. No broken oars. Inside it sat Rowan Yates, sitting upright, hands folded, open. Not drowned. Not wounded. Just gone inside. His pupils were dilated as if he had seen something larger than fear. His skin was cold but dry. And the strangest part, a faint white powder, like ash or crushed bone, coated his boots and shoulders, as if he had walked through a place where the very air turned to dust. The other 3 men were nowhere to be found. The Admiralty hearing. When the crew returned to Port Royal, they reported everything exactly as it happened. The British Admiralty declared them delusional. They were charged with mutiny, cowardice, abandonment of command. Yet, oddly, the panel noted something strange in the official record. Yates's body could not be preserved. It decayed within 48 hours, collapsing into a fine white powder similar to what coated his clothing in the longboat. The cause of death was listed as unknown atmospheric influence. And for over 200 years, the report sat quietly in the naval archives, unread, dismissed as sailor superstition. But modern oceanographers later found something interesting. There is an uncharted circular depression in the same area the broken star recorded its position. Perfectly round. Too symmetrical to be natural. Too large to be a shipwreck. And every deep-sea probe sent into it has malfunctioned the moment it crosses the perimeter. To this day, sailors avoid that patch of ocean. Not because of monsters. Not because of storms. Because some places at sea are older than maps, older than nations, older than bones. Places that rise when they choose. Places that take what they want, and never return it whole. The men who survived the Broken Star incident never fully returned to the sea. But sailors talk always, and their stories spread across port taverns like spilled rum. Slowly at first, then with a heat of their own. By the time months had passed, the Caribbean heard whispers of Rowan Yates's fate everywhere from Nassau's muddy alleys to the stone-walled rum cellars of Port Royal. But the sea doesn't let a story die without adding a new thread. And that thread began with a ship called the Harbinger. She was a small brigantine, lean, fast, crewed by a mixture of runaway indentured servants, escaped African sailors, and a handful of hardened men who'd once served under various privateer captains. They were not wealthy. They were not famous. They sailed mostly to survive, not to conquer. Yet fate doesn't care about reputation. Fate cares about position. And the Harbinger crossed into the wrong stretch of water at exactly the wrong time. The trouble began with the birds. The lookout noticed it first. A single line of frigate birds perched silently on the rail, not moving, not calling, staring straight down at the water as though waiting for something beneath the surface to speak to them. Sailors could trust gulls. They could trust storms. They could even trust sharks. But birds that didn't behave like birds. That meant the sea was thinking. The quartermaster, an older sailor from Barbados named Josiah Crane, stepped beside the helm and watched the quiet creatures with a stillness that spread through the deck like cold air. He whispered, "We've sailed into a graveyard." And then he pointed, not at the sky, not at the waves, but at the horizon. There, barely visible, a thin pale line stretched across the water like bleached rope. First no one understood. But as the ship drifted closer, the pale line widened, thickened, sharpened into something impossible. It was a jawbone longer than the Harbinger herself. The crew froze. Some men crossed themselves. Others whispered old coastal prayers their grandmothers taught them. Crane dropped to his knees and pressed his hand to the deck, feeling for vibrations. He felt none, which in his mind was worse. Because if the sea wasn't trembling at the presence of something that big, it meant whatever creature or structure those bones belonged to wasn't alive. But wasn't dead either. The captain, Miriam Locke, kept her voice level, though her knuckles whitened on the rail. Bring her about, she said. Slowly. But the current didn't obey. It pulled the harbinger forward, tugging her toward the pale arc that curved out of the water like the rim of a massive circle. Some of the crew were muttering now, trying to guess what it was. A whale grave. A reef. Some Spanish sunken thing. God's own ribcage. Devil's front gate. Or wrong. Crane knew they were wrong long before he said it out loud. It's the same shape, he murmured. Just like the broken star's tail. The air seemed to thin. The men looked at him, some in fear, some in disbelief. No one wanted to hear that name. The captain stared at him, feeling her throat tighten. You think that story was true? Crane didn't answer. He didn't have to. Because at that moment, the harbinger crossed the pale curve. And everything changed. The wind stopped, not slowed. Up. The sails hung like dead skin. The sea flattened to glass. Time itself felt different, heavy, stretched, as though sound had to fight through something thick and unseen. A moment later the light dimmed. Not a cloud. Not nightfall. A dimming from beneath. Something enormous passed under the ship. The deck vibrated. Just once, like a breath against the hull. The men staggered. One dropped to his knees. Another gripped a mast as though the wood itself might float away from him. Captain Locke forced herself to the rail and leaned over. She saw nothing. Just an unnaturally smooth darkness beneath the surface. A shadow without edges. Then the bones rose. Not fast. Not violently. Just enough for the water to swell around them. 3 more ribs broke the surface about 20 yards off the port side, forming another arc that matched the first. A perfect circle enclosing the ship. A structure made of ribs the size of pillars. Crane whispered the old Portuguese name he'd heard in taverns. Ossuario do Mar. The ossuary of the sea. Every sailor felt his breath shorten at the words. The water inside the circle turned a pale milky blue, the kind of color the Caribbean never made on its own. It shimmered like moonlight on wet stone, though the sun was still above them. One of the younger sailors began to cry beneath his breath. Captain Locke didn't scold him. She understood. When men cry quietly, it means their body is trying to warn them of something their mind doesn't yet understand. The deck creaked. But the creak wasn't from the ship. Came from the ribs themselves. The pale bones shifted. Just a fraction, like something adjusting position after a long, long sleep. The sound rolled across the water, low and deep and impossibly old, older than any human record. Locke whispered, "Get the anchors down." But when they dropped the iron into the milky water, it didn't sink. Floated. Not touching the surface. Not breaking it. Just hovering in the air above the water like metal caught in a dream. The men backed away. One crossed himself violently. Another stared with empty eyes. "Captain," Crane said quietly. "We need to leave." She nodded. But leaving required wind. And the wind was gone. Then, somewhere inside that circle of bone, the water began to swirl. Slowly at first, then faster, spiraling inward as though it were draining into a hole beneath them. A strange smell rose with it. Not rot, not brine, but something like crushed limestone mixed with burning herbs. Unnatural. Dry. Wrong. Locke gripped the helm so tightly her fingers ached. "Row," she ordered. The men didn't argue. Oars hit the water. The crew pulled with every ounce of muscle they had. The oars didn't move. Not resisting. Not stuck. They simply met no friction. The water had turned soft as breath. And beneath it, the shadow moved again. Slow, wide, deliberate. Crane whispered, almost inaudible. "It's choosing." The captain's heartbeat thundered in her ears. Choosing what? He swallowed. Who? The bones surrounding them shifted again. An unmistakable tightening of the circle. A gesture no natural reef could ever make. The brigantine groaned as if under the weight of being watched by something vast and unseen. Somewhere deep below, a glow began to pulse. Soft, steady, rhythmic, like the beating of a heart the size of a mountain. The water inside the circle brightened. Brightened again. And then, everything stopped. Motion. Wind. Even the ship itself, frozen, except for the glow rising toward the surface, slowly, deliberately, and the men felt it. Whatever was coming up, knew they were there. The glow rising beneath the harbinger wasn't like lantern light or phosphorescence. It wasn't soft or playful or scattered the way moonlit algae shimmer in warm water. This light was dense, heavy, focused. It pulsed as though it had weight, as though each throb pushed the sea upward by force alone. The crew staggered back from the rail, unable to look away. The circle of massive ribs surrounding the brigantine glowed faintly too, as though the light below was waking them, illuminating the hollows of ancient bone. Captain Locke felt her chest tighten. The air tasted strange, dry, metallic, as if she were breathing in ground-up stone. The dimming sky, the still sea, the hovering anchor. It all felt like a single held breath. Then the water at the center of the circle bulged upward. Not in a splash, not in a wave. It pushed up in a slow, smooth dome, perfectly round, like something beneath was swelling toward the surface. The men closest to the bulging water stepped back instinctively. Their fear wasn't panic. It was the quiet, ancient fear that comes when a person realizes they are witnessing something the world never intended them to see. The dome of water broke, and something rose from it. Not a creature, not a skeleton, not metal. It looked like a column, smooth, cylindrical, bone-pale, about as wide as a full-grown man. Not carved, not manufactured, grown. The column rose only 3 or 4 feet above the water, its surface slick and seamless, like the inside of a giant seashell polished by centuries of tide. A faint light pulsed through it, the same slow heartbeat rhythm as the glow beneath. Crane whispered, "It's alive!" But Locke shook her head slowly. "No, it's remembering." The column rotated gently, as though turning to regard the ship. Some of the men swore they felt the air shift when it moved, as though the world around them bent slightly. Another column rose. Then another. 3, 4, 5. Each placed equidistant around the center, forming a second circle inside the ring of ribs. Perfect geometry. Perfect spacing. No natural formation had lines that precise. The column's glow intensified. Then a sound emerged. Low, resonant, nothing like wind or wave. It was vibration before it became audible, something felt in the chest first. The nearest sailor, a tall Jamaican named Absalom, clamped his hands over his ears even though the sound wasn't loud yet. "It's inside my skull," he gasped. The others felt it too. A slow hum, deep and ancient, as though the ocean floor itself was singing. The humming column nearest the ship suddenly emitted a thin stream of mist, white, curling, and impossibly cold. The temperature on deck dropped several degrees in seconds. Breaths turned faintly visible. A thin frost crawled along the rail like ghostly fingers. The youngest sailor, barely more than a boy, whispered, "Captain, we shouldn't be here." Locke didn't answer. She couldn't. She was staring at the center of the glowing formation, where the water had begun swirling again. Not outward this time, but inward toward the columns, feeding the glow with every rotation. The humming deepened, to the pitch of a massive bell rung underwater. And then it stopped, all at once, as though cut. Silence crashed down so suddenly the men felt dizzy. The column's light dimmed to a soft inner glow. The ribs around the ship lowered a fraction. The water flattened. A pause stretched, one long and strange enough that the men dared to believe the phenomenon might have passed. Then the sea beneath the harbinger exhaled. A massive bubble of compressed air burst upward from below, slamming into the hull. The deck lurched violently. Men tumbled. Barrels rolled. A coil of rope slid across the planks like a snake fleeing danger. The ship rocked so hard Locke thought the mast might snap. She shouted, "Hold the rigging!" But her voice felt muffled, swallowed, as if the air itself resisted sound. The swirling glow beneath the ship deepened into something darker. Not black, but a gray so heavy it made the water look thick, almost gelatinous. And something moved inside it. A shadow, vast, shapeless, glided under the hull. The brig trembled. The glow flickered. Then the shadow rose. A shape broke the surface directly beside the ship. Smooth, round, pale. For one frozen second, Locke thought it was another column. But it wasn't. 'Twas an eye. The largest eye any human had ever seen. Half-lidded. Clouded with age. Reflecting nothing. Not focused on the ship. But aware of it. Aware of them. The men closest to the eye stumbled backward. Some falling. Others scrambling on hands and knees. Crane swallowed hard, voice shaking. That isn't a creature of this age. The eye didn't blink. It didn't shift. It simply rose, looking at nothing, yet somehow feeling everything. Then, very slowly, it sank back into the grey water. The ribs surrounding the brig dipped lower, as though whatever held them had released tension. The humming stopped for good. The columns softened their glow. The water stilled. For a terrifying heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the wind returned. Not gradually, violently. A blast of hot air slammed into the Harbinger, filling the sails in an instant and rocking the ship sideways. The ribs sank fast, disappearing beneath the surface like a closing doorway. The pale arcs vanished. The water darkened to its natural blue. The metallic dryness in the air evaporated. The world snapped back into itself. Crane staggered to the rail. Nothing remained. The ocean looked ordinary. Calm, sunlit, empty. Too empty. The columns were gone. The ribs were gone. The glow was gone. And the sea was quiet again. But the men were not. One sailor whispered, "Did it let us go?" Crane answered softly, "No. It wasn't interested in us." Captain Locke gripped the rail tightly. "But it saw us." Crane nodded once, slow and sure. "Aye, Captain. And things that old never see something just once." The sea stayed unervingly calm for the next hour. Calm. Not a ripple against the hull. Not a shift in wind. Not the faintest cry of a seabird overhead. Even the ropes hung still, as if gravity itself hesitated. The men moved about the deck like ghosts, each step careful, quiet, unsure if noise alone might summon whatever ancient thing had just withdrawn beneath them. No one dared speak above a whisper. Their boots made no sound at all on the planks, as though the ship herself urged silence. Captain Locke stood near the helm, her hand resting softly on the worn wood. She wished she could feel her ship's usual heartbeat, the subtle living rhythm of a brigantine slicing through water, but the Harbinger felt hollow, as though part of her soul had been pulled down into that pale circle and not returned. Finally, Crane approached the captain. His expression was calm, but his eyes were wide, rimmed with something between awe and dread. "Captain," he murmured, "something is following us." She didn't ask how he knew. Sometimes a sailor doesn't need to see danger to understand it. The ocean itself delivers the message. Through silence, through changes in pressure, through instincts carved into the bones of men who've weathered too many storms. "What direction?" she whispered. He didn't lift a hand, didn't point. Below, a cold ribbon traced down Locke's spine. They watched the water together for several moments, but nothing stirred. No shadow, no glow. Just clear blue sea stretching toward the dying sun. But the calmness had weight. So much weight it felt like it pressed against their lungs. Then Absalom, the big sailor with steady nerves, hurried toward them. His voice quivered. "The depth line," he whispered. "It's wrong." Locke turned sharply. "What do you mean?" He held up the lead line, still dripping, still trembling slightly in his hand. "It's reading shallow," he breathed. "But not shallow enough for a reef, and not deep enough for open sea. The bottom keeps moving." The captain took the line and examined the knots. 30 fathoms. Then suddenly 27. Then 33. Rising, falling, rising again. Like something massive passed beneath them. Crane didn't look surprised. Just resigned. "It's pacing us." The men exchanged glances but said nothing. They didn't have words strong enough to cover what they had seen, what they had felt, the way the ribs encircled them. The humming, the gigantic eye that rose without intention, without malice, without focus. just existing. The ocean groaned softly beneath the hull. Not like wood shifting, not like waves. A deeper sound. Resonance. Locke stiffened. Crane gripped the rail until his knuckles whitened. Then the wind changed. It came from the east, hot and sharp, snapping the sails taut. The Harbinger lurched forward, finally freed from the frozen air that had trapped her. The ship surged, its timbers creaking with renewed life. But the movement beneath the water kept pace. Steady, patient, as if following out of curiosity. The men didn't dare lean over the rail. Instead, they worked the sails silently, trying to look busy, trying to pretend everything was normal, trying to convince themselves that if they acted like sailors rather than frightened children, the sea might treat them gently. But the ocean does not respect performance. It respects truth. A sudden thud struck the underside of the hull, deep, firm, like a giant finger tapping the brig's belly. The ship jolted, wood rattling, lanterns swinging wildly. The crew froze. Again, Absalom whispered. It touched us again. Another thud, this time from starboard. Then a third from port. Not attacking, testing. As though the thing below wanted to understand what kind of creature the Harbinger was. Locke inhaled slowly, steadying her voice. We hold course. No panic. No sudden turns. But her heart hammered. Not from fear of dying, but from the fear that this thing below them didn't understand the difference between ship and prey. Or worse, that it understood perfectly. The hull groaned as the shadow moved beneath them again, circling. Crane stepped close to the captain, lowering his voice even further. Captain, whatever it is doesn't want to destroy us. If it wanted that, we'd already be gone. Studying. Curious. Locke didn't find comfort in the idea of curiosity. Curiosity belonged to children, explorers, scholars. Curiosity was not a trait she wanted in something that had bones the size of cathedral arches. A long tremble rolled through the hull, so subtle it felt like a heartbeat echoing through the wood. Men clutched the rigging. A barrel tipped and rolled, bouncing against the rail before settling. Locke tried to focus on the horizon. If she could just see land, just a line of dark green, maybe the terror would ease. But the horizon remained empty, the world painted only in blue and fading gold. Then Crane did something unexpected. He walked to the port side, leaned over, and whispered something to the sea. No one else heard the words. They were too soft, barely breath, carried away instantly by the warm evening air. But Locke saw the expression on his face. Gentle, mourning, respectful. "What did you say?" she asked quietly when he returned. He didn't look at her. "Old sailor's prayer," he murmured. "For crossing places we shouldn't cross." Before she could respond, the ship lurched again, this time harder, enough to tip one man off balance. He stumbled to his knees, gripping the plank with trembling hands. Then it happened. For a brief second, a heartbeat, no more. The water beside the ship darkened, not with shadow but with shape. A smooth, curved mass swept just beneath the surface. Not a fin, not a tail. Something rounded, immense, moving with the slow certainty of a mountain drifting through water. The men gasped. Locke clapped a hand over her mouth. Crane stared silently, reverently. And then, as quickly as it appeared, it sank again, the water clearing until nothing remained but ripples spreading across the surface. The sea went still. The wind softened. The presence beneath them faded. Slowly, reluctantly, as though it was finally turning away. Minutes passed. 10, 15. The water deepened. The depth line steadied. The air warmed. And one by one, the men's shoulders loosened as if released from a giant hand. Crane finally exhaled. "It's gone." But Locke kept her eyes on the horizon, her voice barely more than breath. "No, it let us go." And in the silence that followed, every man aboard understood the difference. The deck feels different tonight, like the boards themselves have been warmed by the weight of earlier footsteps. The lanterns burn low, swaying in their hooks as the ship glides through a quiet stretch of open sea. Most of the crew has turned in after hours of labor. carrying barrels, patching rope, scraping the hull, and the few who remain awake are scattered like drifting thoughts. Their murmurs are soft, almost blending with the hush of waves pushing along the ship's belly. But to understand this moment, you have to picture what the day had already taken from these men. The sun had been ruthless, beating down until every shirt clung wet against a spine. They'd hauled anchors, shifted cargo, and swept away debris left from the spray of last night's crosswind. Pirate ships weren't just engines of chaos. They were machines, and every machine needs upkeep. And if something wasn't maintained, it wasn't the ship that paid the price. It was the crew. A rotten beam, a damaged mast, a frayed line. All could mean death miles from land. Earlier that afternoon, the quartermaster walked the deck with a mental checklist, muttering quietly as he eyed the rigging. He paused to run his fingers along a worn knot, shaking his head before calling for the nearest sailor to climb the ratlins and reinforce it. Everything on board had to be seaworthy, because even a single mistake could ruin an entire crossing. Below deck, the smell of the day still lingers, the scent of tar, sweat, rope, old wood, and the salted damp that never quite leaves. The hammocks sway gently, some occupied, some empty, all close enough that even in sleep, no man has real privacy. But pirates rarely cared for privacy. What they wanted was safety and predictability in a world that didn't offer either easily. Their tight quarters created bonds, tensions, whispered jokes, and quiet arguments. The lower deck was as much a world of its own as any small town, with its own rhythms and unspoken rules. And though tonight is calm, the ship still carries the exhaustion of the last few days. A run of rough weather, a sudden near collision with a hidden reef, and rumors among the men that a naval frigate had been seen 2 days prior. No one can confirm it, but the idea alone is enough to keep tempers sharp and hands on edge. A pirate crew didn't fear merchants. They feared warships, vessels built not to flee but to chase, equipped with trained gunners and crews who operated under strict discipline rather than loose democratic agreement. Even now, on this quiet night, the lookout up in the shrouds scans the horizon with careful eyes. He doesn't relax, not even when the rest of the crew deflates into their hammocks or into the corner shadows where stories and pipe smoke drift together. The lookout knows what's expected of him. He is the first warning of danger, the first whisper of opportunity, the lone voice that can shift the fate of every man on board. Down on the main deck, a few sailors sit in a small circle, lit dimly by a single lantern. They're sharing what little comfort they have. Dry tobacco, a tin cup with a swallow of rum still sloshing at the bottom, and quiet conversation about ports they've visited or hope to visit again. One man speaks about Tortuga. The noise, the colors, the wild freedom of it. Another talks about New Providence Island and the strange mix of outlaws, merchants, and fugitives who gather there like driftwood pushed by the same tide. Some dream of gold, some dream of land, and some dream of nothing at all because dreaming is a luxury they can't afford anymore. And as the ship moves steadily onward, a soft rhythm settles in. The creak of ropes, the far-off cry of a gull that must have wandered farther from land than usual, and the murmuring of men whose voices mellow into the night. The cook passes by carrying a bucket of scraps he plans to dump overboard. The carpenter heads below with a lantern, ready to double-check the repair he did that morning. A pair of sailors drag a heavy coil of rope toward the bow, preparing for what tomorrow's tasks might demand. These are not dramatic moments. No cannon smoke, no treasure, no storm. But this is the real backbone of pirate life. Maintenance, routine, repetition. The hours that filled the space between danger and opportunity. The parts of their world that no ballad or embellished tavern story ever bothers to mention. Yet without this, without the sanding of wood, the sharpening of tools, the patching of sails, the ship would fail long before any battle began. Somewhere near the stern, a soft humming starts up, a sailor singing under his breath. It's not a shanty designed to rally the crew. It's more a private tune, something from his childhood, familiar enough that a few others recognize the pattern. Their voices join quietly, barely above the whisper of the ocean. The melody floats through the night air, weaving around the lantern glow, drifting to the bow like a memory carried by wind. The quartermaster emerges again, checking who's awake. He doesn't interrupt the singing. He only watches for a moment, nodding slightly as if satisfied that the crew's spirits haven't sunk too far. The quartermaster knows morale is as vital as rigging. A ship full of angry, exhausted men is more dangerous than any storm. But tonight, despite their fatigue, there's a softness to the crew's demeanor, a calm settling in, thin but real. Another sailor, leaning against a barrel near the rail, sharpens a blade with slow, consistent strokes. He isn't preparing for a fight. It's simply a habit, part of a pirate's daily upkeep. Tools mattered, weapons mattered, and letting either grow dull could mean regret at the worst possible moment. Far below, in the hold, the sound changes entirely. Down there, everything is darker, quieter, thicker. Barrels packed with salted meat, preserved fish, water, rum, and biscuit are strapped against the beams, all of it carefully rationed by the quartermaster. Supplies were no joke. Miscount, misjudge, or spoil something, and the entire crew could starve or dehydrate miles from the nearest port. A ship was a fragile ecosystem, and every man aboard had to understand his place within it. This is what real pirate life demanded. Cooperation, discipline, shared survival. And even though the world called them criminals, in these long stretches of uneventful days, they were simply men trying to keep a ship alive in a world that was rarely forgiving. Tonight, as the ship continues forward, the sky above widens into a deep velvet stretch, and the stars shimmer with a sharpness you don't get on land. The moon reflects across the water in a long ribbon of silver blue, guiding the ship as though pointing the way to whatever tomorrow holds. Some men glance at the horizon before turning in, as if trying to read something in the distance. Change, luck, threat, or promise. And though the sea seems peaceful, though the night feels gentle, there's still something lingering in the air. Something just out of sight. Something the crew senses in pieces but can't yet name. A shift, a possibility. A quiet tension wrapped beneath this calm night, waiting for the moment to reveal itself. The next morning begins before the sun even succeeds in breaking the horizon. The ship is already awake, stirring, stretching, adjusting itself the way a great wooden creature might prepare for the day. A few gulls circle overhead, their cries sharp and distant, almost echoing across the open water. The breeze carries the faint smell of salt and old rope, but also something subtler. Something warm and promising, the kind of air that tells seasoned sailors the weather will favor them for a while. On deck, the early risers move with slow, steady motions. No one wastes energy at dawn. They conserve it because they know the labor ahead. One man pours a splash of seawater over his face from a wooden bucket, inhaling sharply as the chill hits his skin. Another rubs his palms together, working out the stiffness from sleeping in a cramped hammock. A third tightens the cloth around his head to keep his hair out of his eyes while he works the rigging. The cook rings a small iron bell. Breakfast. Though the word feels generous, its hard tack softened with a bit of broth, and whatever salted meat hasn't spoiled. Some men take it gratefully. Others turn it over in their hands like they're deciding whether it's worth the effort to chew. Food at sea wasn't something pirates enjoyed. It was something they endured. But compared to what naval crews received at times, thin portions, strict rationing, punishments for complaints, pirates often had it better simply because they shared what they had and demanded fairness. While the crew eats, the ship itself keeps pressing forward, the sails catching the soft morning wind. A few sailors glance up, checking how the canvas is filling, noting the angle, adjusting lines without being told. This wasn't because they were obedient. It was because if they didn't care for the ship wouldn't care for them. The relationship was mutual, unspoken, and always serious. The quartermaster appears. His hair still wet from washing with a bit of fresh water he rationed for himself. He carries a small slate in one hand, a thin stub of chalk in the other. He calls out for the crew to gather, not urgently, but firmly enough that they know not to delay. The men cluster together on the deck near the mainmast, leaning against barrels or folding their arms across their chests as they wait for the day's assignments. The quartermaster goes down the list, his voice calm and even. Today there will be routine maintenance on the starboard shrouds, patching a torn braid of hemp rope that had frayed near the topmast. 2 men are assigned to scour the galley and the lower deck. 3 are sent to work with a carpenter to reinforce a bulkhead panel that showed signs of cracking after last week's rough seas. And a few are ordered to take the morning watch at the bow and stern, scanning for sails, merchant or military. The captain emerges next, not with the swagger or arrogance described in the myths, but with the quiet authority of someone who knows the crew respects him because they chose him. He isn't draped in gold or velvet. He wears plain clothing, loose trousers, a faded coat, a belt with a functional dagger, not a ceremonial sword. Real pirate captains didn't dress like the stories claimed. They dressed like men who expected to work alongside their crew. He gives a short update about their course. Steady eastward travel, aiming toward a known trade route where merchant ships often drift too close to shallow waters. Merchants preferred predictable paths, and pirates took advantage of that predictability the way a hunter understands the habits of prey. But the captain also reminds them that a naval vessel was rumored nearby. No confirmation, no exact heading. Only whispers passed between ships. But whispers mattered. Whispers saved lives. The crew listens carefully, weighing every word. Some nod. Some mutter. Some simply look out at the faint orange glow forming along the horizon as the sun begins to rise. A pirate ship might be democratic in many ways, but when the captain spoke about danger or strategy, every man understood the importance of listening. There was no room for ego when survival hung on shared awareness. After the briefing's end, the crew spreads out to their tasks. A pair of sailors climb the rigging with the ease of men who've spent years moving with the ship as if it were part of their own bodies. Their feet find footholds instinctively, their hands gripping the lines tightly as they ascend toward the topmast. Below them, another sailor coils rope with methodical care, twisting it in perfect loops that won't tangle when needed later. Near the aft deck, the carpenter taps against the wood, listening for hollow sounds that might indicate rot. He's joined by a younger crewman who asks quiet questions, eager to learn. Pirates weren't always experienced adult men. Some were teenagers, some even younger, running from poverty or punishment or simply chasing the idea of freedom they'd heard whispered in markets and alleys. They learned quickly because the sea didn't tolerate slow learners. Mid-morning arrives, and with it, the sun climbs higher, scattering sharp light across the waves. The sky fades from pale gray to bright blue, and the water reflects the glow like polished glass. The crew begins to sweat as they work, wiping their foreheads with the backs of their hands, pausing every so often to drink from shared water barrels. Hydration mattered. Dehydration meant confusion, exhaustion, and mistakes, things a crew could not afford. At the bow, the lookout leans forward, shading his eyes as he scans the horizon. The sea looks peaceful, but looks can deceive. A thin wisp of cloud passes overhead, and he watches the line where sky meets water for any hint of a mast, a sail, or even a stray glimmer of metal catching sunlight. Hours pass quietly, punctuated only by the occasional call from one sailor to another. Meanwhile, a few men below deck play a brief game of dice during their break, using small bone cubes they carved themselves. They laugh softly, careful to keep the noise from reaching the ears of anyone who might accuse them of distraction. Gambling was tolerated among many crews, but only in moderation. Too much could stir resentment or arguments, and the quartermaster kept a close eye on who owed who what. By midday the air grows warmer, but the wind stays steady. The sails remain full, and the ship slices through the water with a grace that hides its weight. A group of sailors gather by the railing to patch a section of canvas sailcloth. They work with palm needles and thread thick as twine, pulling each stitch strong enough to hold even against sudden gusts. And still, underneath all this movement, all this ordinary labor, something subtle rests, something the crew feels without discussing. There's a kind of anticipation humming quietly in the background, a readiness, a tension threaded through the calm like a faint vibration in the wood. No one speaks of it, but every man senses it. The sea today is too smooth, the sky too clear, the workday too uninterrupted. The kind of day where something usually shifts. Something unseen just beyond the edge of vision. Something the ship seems to drift toward without meaning to. The sun reaches its highest point, casting sharp gold across the deck as the crew settles into the deep rhythm of the afternoon. The ship feels almost drowsy under the steady warmth, creaking and sighing like an old creature stretching its limbs. But even in this gentler part of the day, the crew remains alert in their own quiet ways, because routine on a pirate ship was never truly easy, only predictable. Near the mainmast, a group of sailors tug at a length of rigging, adjusting the tension across the yards. Their hands move with practiced precision, palms rough and scarred from years of hauling rope in all kinds of weather. One man spits over the side, comments about the wind shifting slightly, and the others nod. To anyone unfamiliar with sailing, it might seem like pointless speculation. But to these men, the wind is a partner, a mood, a warning sign, a whispered message they constantly interpret. Down on the lower deck, the smell of tar and sawdust lingers from the carpenter's repairs. He crouches beside a reinforced panel, tapping the wood with the flat side of his hand, assessing whether the fix will hold. The younger sailor assisting him looks tired, sweat dripping off his chin, but he watches every movement closely. Apprenticeship at sea didn't come with gentle instruction. It came with urgency, because if he didn't learn fast enough, one day he'd be the one responsible for a mistake that cost lives. In the galley, the cook wipes his brow with a stained cloth as he tends to a small pot simmering on the iron grate. Fresh ingredients are a luxury they almost never have, so he works with salted pork, biscuit crumbs, bits of onion that have miraculously survived weeks at sea, and a dash of pepper scraped from the bottom of a jar. He tastes the broth, nods once, and ladles some into a wooden bowl. A passing sailor stops to take a sip and lets out a soft sigh, satisfied not because it's delicious, but because it's warm and filling. Warm food meant morale, and morale meant survival. Above deck, the sunlight sparkles sharply off the waves, and a couple of sailors take brief refuge in the ship's shaded areas. They sit with their backs against a barrel, sharing a small tin of tobacco. One strikes a flint, lighting a pipe with cupped hands to shield the flame from the wind. The smoke curls lazily upward, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and leaf. For a moment, the two sit in silence, letting the slow drag of the pipe ease the tension that never fully leaves their shoulders. Near the starboard rail, a few crewmen mend a section of netting used for storing gear. They talk as they work, voices low but steady. Their conversation flows between memories of past voyages, quick jokes about each other's habits, and cautious hopes of reaching a friendly port soon. Ports were more than supply stops. They were breathers, places where the crew could spend their hard-earned shares, wash in fresh water, and feel solid ground beneath their boots. Yet even then, ports meant danger too, because authorities often waited there to capture men with bounties on their heads. And some of these men, whether they admit it or not, carry heavy prices on their names. The afternoon wears on, and slowly, a few clouds begin to gather far off on the horizon. Not storm clouds, they're too thin and too high, but enough to make the lookout in the shrouds narrow his eyes. He shifts position on his perch, gripping the spar tightly as he surveys the distant haze. He takes a moment longer than usual before looking away. Something caught his attention, though not enough to sound an alarm, just enough to keep him focused. Below, the captain steps out from the chart room, carrying a rolled parchment under his arm. His expression is thoughtful as he studies the sky, checking the wind direction and the shadows cast across the deck. He makes no announcement, no expression of worry, just a silent calculation that only experienced sailors fully understand. The crew watches him from the corners of their eyes, not directly but knowingly, because a captain's mood is often the first indicator of what lies ahead. A little later, the quartermaster gathers a small group to inspect the supply stores again. Rations have to be monitored with near-mathematical precision. He checks the barrels of water first, tapping the lids, listening, lifting them slightly to gauge what's left. Then he moves to the salted meat, making careful notes in his head about how many days the current stock will last. Pirates couldn't simply resupply whenever they wanted. Every decision mattered. When to hunt for a merchant ship, when to seek a port, when to conserve or spend. By late afternoon, the air grows warmer, heavier. The sea glimmers like molten metal under the sun. A few sailors strip off their shirts, tying them around their waists, and begin scrubbing the deck with holystones, blocks of sandstone used to smooth and clean the planks. They push them back and forth with long handles, scraping away salt crust and grime. It's slow, exhausting work, but necessary. A clean deck meant better footing, fewer injuries, and a healthier ship overall. The rhythmic scraping blends with a sigh of waves and the soft groan of the mast under wind pressure. It becomes almost musical in its consistency, a steady heartbeat that pulses through the vessel. But despite the monotony of the work, there's something curious woven into the atmosphere today. Something no one speaks about directly. Even the men joke less, their movements a little more reserved, their eyes drifting more often toward the horizon. It's not fear, not exactly. It's awareness. This deep, instinctive sailor's intuition that tells them the sea is changing, even if the weather doesn't show it yet. Near the stern, two experienced sailors whisper to each other about the slight shift in tide pull. Another mentions the faint ripple pattern on the surface, different from the morning. These are tiny cues, almost invisible to casual eyes, but impossible for seasoned hands to ignore. Still, the ship presses forward, smooth and determined, its hull slicing gently through the afternoon calm. As the shadows stretch longer across the deck, and the wind softens just enough to sound different in the rigging, a subtle shiver travels through the crew. One man pauses mid-task. Another straightens up, glancing over the rail. The lookout shifts again, leaning forward with sudden focus. Something out there. Something far away. Something they haven't yet seen clearly, is beginning to take shape. The moment the lookout shifts his posture, even slightly, a ripple of quiet awareness spreads through the deck. No alarm is called, no orders shouted, but the crew begins to feel a tiny pull inside. The same pull sailors have trusted for centuries. It's the sense that the horizon is no longer empty, that the sea is no longer simply rolling toward forever. Something is there, something distant, something that hasn't revealed its shape yet. The lookout stays silent for several minutes, watching intently. His eyes sweep left, then right, then return to the same fixed point. Below him, life on deck continues, though more slowly now. A sailor coiling rope pauses, glancing upward as if expecting a shout. The men scrubbing the deck slow their strokes. Even the quartermaster, emerging from the hold with a mental tally still forming in his head, senses the shift. He looks up at the mast instinctively, then toward the horizon. But pirates understood the value of patience. Calling out a false alarm could create unnecessary panic or, worse, waste precious time and energy. So the lookout watches, and the crew waits. Minutes stretch like tightened rope. The wind thins, switching direction just slightly, brushing cooler across the deck. The sails respond with a soft thud as they adjust their curve. A few gulls pass overhead, their wings cutting through the air with quick, sharp beats. The sea seems to hold its breath. Then finally, the lookout calls down. Not loudly, not frantically, but with the solid tone of someone who has confirmed what he needs to confirm. Point. The captain steps forward immediately, shading his eyes with the edge of his hand. The quartermaster joins him. Several sailors follow, lining the deck rail but keeping quiet. Every man tries to match the lookout's line of sight. At first, it looks like nothing more than a ripple on the water's surface. Shimmer maybe. A trick of distance. The horizon plays tricks often. Heat distortion, mist, reflections. But as the ship continues forward, the glimmer takes on sharper edges. Faint. Barely there. Like the ghost of a shape just beginning to exist. A distant mast. Leaning slightly. Too dark against the haze to be a cloud. Too solid to be a bird in formation. A mast means a ship. And a ship means possibility. Wealth, danger, or both. The captain lowers his hand slowly. His expression unreadable. He doesn't rush to conclusions. He waits for the wind to shift again, for the ship to tilt just enough that the angle changes and reveals more. The quartermaster squints, tracing the faint outline with careful eyes. Around them, the crew remains silent but intensely focused. The humming conversations from earlier vanish. The clatter of tools softens. Even the deck scrubbers stop completely, resting their holystones against the planks. Every pirate knows that the difference between spotting a merchant vessel and spotting a naval frigate could decide whether the day ends in celebration or in bloodshed. The lookout calls again. Distance still far. Course uncertain. Could be drifting. Could be anchored. Could be damaged. Could be unaware of their presence. Could be perfectly aware and pretending otherwise. Pirates were not reckless attack dogs. They were observers first, hunters second. They studied their prey. They read the sea. They trusted silence more than bravado. The captain gives the order to maintain course. No sudden shifts, no aggressive movements. They would watch longer. Let the shape declare itself. Let the sea reveal the truth. Some crew members return to their tasks, but their focus remains divided. One man climbs the rigging to a midpoint perch for a better angle. Another walks the line of cannons, checking their readiness just out of habit. The carpenter sets down his tools, leaning against the railing, eyes narrowed. Even the cook steps out from the galley doorway, wiping his hands on his apron as he looks toward the uncertainty ahead. The ship continues its glide through the afternoon light, and slowly, the distant form becomes more distinct. The outline of a second mast. The hint of sails furled tight. A hull riding low in the water, suggesting weight. Maybe cargo. The quartermaster murmurs something to the captain, too soft for others to hear, but the captain gives a subtle nod. He's thinking, calculating, turning possibilities over in his mind the way a musician tests notes before beginning a song. More minutes pass. The horizon sharpens. Now, even the men on the deck can see it fully. A vessel, medium-sized, drifting slowly across their path. Not the imposing silhouette of a warship. Not the tall, proud structure of a navy galley. This ship is smaller. Older. Merchant-built. A merchant ship meant goods. Goods meant profit. Profit meant survival. But still they wait. The captain lifts a hand, signaling the crew to stay quiet, stay steady. The crew obeys, tension tightening a little deeper in their shoulders. They'd all known days like this, when the world narrows to a single point in the distance, and every decision hinges on what that point becomes. Pirates did not leap blindly into battle. They watched, they read, they measured risk with the precision of gamblers weighing stakes. As the afternoon light sinks deeper, shading the sea with a warmer glow, the ship ahead grows clearer still. The crew begins to trade glances now. Not loud whispers, not excited shouts, just those silent shared looks between men who understand what might soon unfold. But there's something else too. Something odd. The sails on the distant vessel are furled tightly. No wind in them. No movement. It drifts with the current rather than the breeze. That alone is strange. Ships avoid drifting unless forced. No captain allows it without reason. A damaged mast. A broken rudder. Illness aboard. Desertion. An abandoned ship. Or something worse. The crew feels it again. That subtle, creeping pull in the air. That instinct sailors carried like a sixth sense. Something about the stillness of the other ship. Something about the way it lies on the water. Doesn't feel quite right. There's a moment, right before a pirate ship fires its first broadside, when everything goes completely silent. No shouting. No stomping boots. No jangling cutlasses. Just a stillness so sharp you could slice it with the tip of a dagger. And in that breathless pause, every man on deck knows exactly what to do. Not because someone is barking orders. Not because of fear. But because of a set of rules written long before that moment even arrived. Pirate code. You'd expect pirates, outlaws, thieves, rebels to hate rules. But here's the twist that surprises almost everyone who studies real pirate history. Pirate crews had some of the most strict, democratic, and surprisingly fair rulebooks on the oceans. More organized than many European navies, more equal than most governments, and more brutally enforced than any courtroom. Tonight, we're stepping straight into that world. Right into the hidden laws that shaped life aboard the roughest ships ever to sail the Caribbean, the Atlantic, and the Indian Ocean. And as your mind settles into the rhythm of the sea, slow waves, the creak of worn planks, canvas breathing in the wind, imagine yourself standing on the deck during a moonlit council. The lanterns sway, the air tastes of salt, and the smell of tar sits heavy in your chest. Because this is where the pirate code begins. The first thing most people never realize is that many pirate codes started as written documents, actual sheets of parchment every crew member had to swear on. Some were signed with names, others with rough marks, carved crosses, or shaky initials from men who had never seen a school. Once you signed it, you were bound to it. And breaking the code meant punishments that would make even hardened sailors stiffen at the spine. But before punishment came something much more unusual. Voting. Yes, pirates voted on everything. Who becomes captain? Where the ship sails next? Which enemy to chase? How to split treasure? What happens when someone breaks the rules? In a world dominated by absolute monarchies, rigid military chains, and kings who ruled because of bloodline, not brains, pirates were out there saying, no crown, no throne, no commander unless we choose one. And the code reflected that. Most codes made two positions absolutely sacred: the captain and the quartermaster. The captain led in battle, his authority absolute when the cannons were lit and chaos exploded across the water. But during calm times he was not a king, not even close. The quartermaster, elected by the crew, balanced his power. The captain commanded the storms. The quartermaster commanded everything else. Why? Because pirates knew too much power in one man's hands invited disaster. They'd seen naval captains whip men bloody for minor disobedience. They'd felt the bite of unfair punishments. They'd watched greedy officers take more coin than the men who risked their lives. So the code built a world that flipped the ocean's hierarchy. Treasure was shared in equal proportions, more than soldiers ever saw. Food was shared equally. Even prize ships captured in battle were distributed based on the code's equations. You fought. You earned. You risked your neck. You were paid. Some codes went even further. They provided health insurance. If a pirate lost a hand, an arm, a leg, or an eye, he was compensated, sometimes with more gold than he'd see from 3 raids combined. A man who lost his right arm in battle might receive the modern equivalent of thousands of dollars. It sounds almost civilized. But beneath the fairness was a shadow, because once you joined, the rules held you tighter than chains. One of the harshest laws involved desertion. Once the code was signed, leaving the crew without permission was considered betrayal of the highest order. Punishments ranged from whipping, to marooning, to death. Marooning, being left alone on a barren sandbar with nothing but a bottle of water and a loaded pistol, was reserved for the worst offenses. And it lived in every pirate's nightmares. You could almost feel that fear at night, in the way men double-checked their loyalty before speaking. But the code wasn't only about survival. It also shaped behavior. Most codes banned gambling, not because pirates disliked games, but because losing money created anger, and anger created fights, and fights spilled blood. A ship couldn't afford grudges floating beneath its decks like sharks in the dark. Speaking of fights, the code also enforced something else. No brawling on board. If 2 men had bad blood, they were allowed to fight. But not on the ship. They had to settle it on land. And even then, only with controlled rules. No sudden stabbings in the middle of the night. No ambushes. If a man got killed in an unfair fight, the killer's punishment was often death. There's a strange order to it. A rough kind of justice. A balance between violence and reason, since too much of either could sink the whole crew. But maybe the most fascinating part of the pirate code is what it reveals about the spirit of pirates themselves. These were men who had been beaten down by society, exploited by captains, cheated by merchants, abandoned by empires. And when they turned to a life of outlaw freedom, they didn't create chaos. They created structure, quality, shared risk, shared reward, community where every man had a voice. When you understand that, a pirate ship stops feeling like a nest of madmen, and starts feeling more like a floating republic. Fragile one, dangerous one, but a republic nonetheless. And as your thoughts drift into that moonlit council again, the lanterns glowing, the sound of waves soft against the hull, you can almost hear the scritch-scratch of quills signing those old rules. You can almost feel the weight of the decisions that would shape everything that happened next. Because pirate life wasn't just adventure. It wasn't just plunder. It wasn't just chaos. It was order carved from lawlessness. Democracy built from desperation. A brotherhood forged by the need to survive a world that had turned its back on them. And those rules, those handwritten codes stained with salt and sweat, they held the crew together long enough to make pirate history one of the wildest, strangest, and most surprisingly structured chapters on the open sea. There's a moment after midnight when the sea stops sounding alive. No waves slapping the hull. No gulls screeching overhead. No ropes tapping against the mast. Just a soundless, breathless pause. A kind of ocean silence that settles into the bones. On those nights, every pirate, no matter how fearless, no matter how soaked in rum or blood, felt a cold little pinch behind the ribs. Because out on the old trade routes of the Caribbean and Atlantic, there were ships that weren't entirely empty. Ships that sailors claimed were cursed, haunted, or carrying something no living man ever wanted to meet. Tonight, the deck lanterns hang dim and the sea feels too deep, almost as if it's listening. And this is where we step into the real ghost legends pirates whispered about when they thought no one else was awake. Stories that weren't written in books. Stories that traveled from ship to ship like warnings. Stories sailors swore were true. One of the most feared tales was the ghost galleon of the Windward Passage. Sailors described it as an enormous, rotting Spanish treasure ship drifting with no crew, no lights and no sound. But the strangest detail, the part every survivor repeated, was the sails. They never moved. Not with storms, not with gales, not with hurricanes. They just hung, stiff and silent like sheets of bone. Pirates claimed that anyone who tried to board it never returned. The few who escaped said that once they stepped onto its deck, the air changed. It grew cold, unnaturally cold. The boards creaked as if dozens of unseen boots were walking behind them. And far below, deep inside the ship, something rattled like chains scraping across stone. Some believed it was a plague ship abandoned by its own navy. Some said it carried cursed treasure. And others whispered that the souls of the dead Spanish sailors, killed during a mutiny, still patrolled it, searching for the man who betrayed them. In the lawless world of pirates, treasure meant everything. But even the boldest captains warned their crews not to chase that drifting galleon. Some wealth, they said, was meant to stay at the bottom of the world. Another story sailed out of the Indian Ocean around Madagascar, where pirate dens once flourished. This one was called the Lantern Ship. Sailors claimed that on moonless nights, a faint green glow would appear on the horizon. At first, it looked like a lantern swaying in the distance. Nothing unusual. But instead of staying still or drifting naturally with the wind, it moved toward ships with unnatural speed. The closer it came, the brighter it grew. And beneath the light, some crews swore they saw the outline of a small sloop, burned black from bow to stern, sails charred into ribbons, mast scorched as if lightning had struck it 100 times. The worst part wasn't the ship. It was the light. They said the lantern never swung, never flickered, never dimmed. Just a steady green flame that never should have survived the wind. Crews who chased it, thinking it was a distress signal, vanished. Crews who ran sometimes survived. But they told the same detail. The ship made no sound as it moved. No waves displaced. No wood groaning. No sails snapping. Just that eerie light sliding over the dark water like a slow-moving star. Many believed it belonged to a pirate crew burnt alive after a failed raid on a Portuguese fortress. Others said it was the ghost of a traitor captain doomed to signal forever, calling ships toward their doom. Whether truth or fear, sailors avoided it. If the Green Lantern appeared, the order was simple: drop the sails, snuff every torch, pray it passes. But the most chilling stories weren't about cursed treasure or glowing ships at all. They were about sounds. Sounds heard on nights when the sea was too calm, or when the fog pressed low and heavy over the bow. Some pirates spoke of phantom oars dipping into the water. Slow, steady, rhythmic. No boat in sight. Just that quiet splash 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 getting closer. Others claimed they heard footsteps pacing the deck even when every man was asleep. Heavy boots moving with purpose. As if someone long dead was checking the rigging, or keeping watch, or preparing to raise the alarm. One quiet story came from a crew sailing under Captain Howell Davis. The men claimed that sometimes, deep after midnight, they heard a voice speaking softly near the helm. A man murmuring directions: port, starboard, furl the foresail. Yet no one stood there. It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was calm. Commanding. As if a dead navigator still guided the ship out of old habit. And the strangest part, every time they followed the whispered advice, the ship avoided a storm. But the most famous haunted legend of the pirate era, the one that froze the blood of even hardened buccaneers, was the tale of the Whistler. This one wasn't tied to a specific ship. It followed sailors. The story went like this. If a pirate betrayed his crew, buried treasure without sharing it, stole from a sick man, or deserted a dying captain, the Whistler found him. Men described hearing a single low whistle late at night. Not a tune, not a melody, just one steady note drifting across the water. It always came from somewhere impossible, far out at sea or deep inside a storm, or from beneath the very planks of the ship. Once you heard it, it followed you, every night, growing louder, closer, until eventually a man would vanish. Sometimes in port, sometimes from his hammock, sometimes over the rails without a splash, as if pulled. Crews whispered that the Whistler was the ghost of a pirate murdered for hiding gold from his brothers. And now he wandered the world taking back what was owed. No one knew if the story was real, but it kept pirates honest. Fear is often better than law. You can almost feel the weight of these tales, the creak of phantom boards, the hush of an empty sea, the cold press of wind that doesn't come from any storm. Because pirate life wasn't just hard, violent, lawless. It was eerie, unpredictable, filled with long nights where the ocean felt like another world, and the line between life and death was as thin as a rope's shadow. When men live on water, they start to believe water listens. And maybe sometimes it does. There's a particular silence that hangs over a pirate ship in the moments before a fight. It's not fear exactly. It's not courage either. It's the same stillness that settles inside a man right before he pulls a trigger, before he steps off a ledge, before a wave breaks and changes everything. That frozen breath before chaos. Pirates felt that more than most people in history. When a lookout shouted that a sail had appeared on the horizon, whether it was a merchantman ripe for the taking or a navy ship ready to hunt, the entire crew shifted into a different state of mind. The air thickened. Boots thudded a little heavier on deck. Men spoke less. Even the sea seemed to lean in, waiting. The first thing a pirate captain did was judge the target. Distance, wind direction, flag, speed, and most importantly, does this ship look like it'll fight back? No captain wanted a messy battle if a clean threat of violence would make the target drop its colors. But they also knew that a wealthy ship could turn their entire year around. So the order spread fast and sharp. Clear for action. That phrase changed the whole ship. From a floating campsite of hammocks, cooking pots, tools, and scattered belongings, it transformed into a weapon. Men hauled cannons into position, locking wheels with wooden chocks. Gunners unrolled packets of grape-shot and double-shot round iron. Bucket after bucket of water splashed onto the deck so blood wouldn't make it too slippery. Powder monkeys, some as young as 12, ran to fetch cartridges from the magazine, their hands shaking but steady enough from practice. Every hammock was taken down and stuffed into the gunnels. Not for storage, for protection. Layers of canvas and rope acted like crude padding, catching splinters that would otherwise tear through bodies like flying wooden knives. On the upper deck, the boarding party readied their tools. Cutlasses sharpened along the edge of a whetstone, pistols primed with fresh flints, axes checked for loose heads, knives tucked into belts. These weren't orderly military men. They wore mismatched boots, torn shirts, pieces of stolen uniforms. But their equipment was always ready, because they never knew when a merchant captain might try to ram, flee, or fire. Then came the part no one talked about but everyone knew. Men took off rings, tucked letters deeper into chests, handed their share of rum to a friend, just in case. Some whispered prayers, some whispered curses, some hummed old shanties to calm their breath. A few tightened cloth around their heads to keep sweat from running into their eyes. There were pirates who stood tall and loud just to hide how fast their hearts were beating. There were others who became frighteningly calm, almost too still, like they had stepped out of their own bodies and were simply watching. But every man, from the oldest sea dog to the youngest runaway boy, listened for the same sound. The drum of the first cannon. When the target ship came close enough, the captain would raise his speaking trumpet and call out one last offer. "Strike your colors!" If the merchant crew obeyed, the entire moment dissolved into a storm of relieved exhale. But if they hesitated, or if a naval ship revealed its guns, then the calm cracked open. The gunners lit their fuses. Decks shook, and everything became thunder. Pirate cannons weren't as heavy or organized as those of the Royal Navy, but pirates were fast. They fired in irregular bursts, one gun after another, slamming hot iron into the enemy hull before the other ship could settle into a rhythm. They aimed low, always low, because a hole at the waterline could end a fight quicker than any duel on deck. The smoke grew so thick men could barely see the mast above their own heads. Sulfur stung the eyes. Sparks flew off the ropes. Hot wadding smoldered where it landed. Inside that haze, orders became half-shouted, half-felt motions. Run out the gun. Swab her. Load. Fire. And in between each blast, you could hear the more human sounds. Panting breath, boots scraping across wet boards, someone coughing the acrid gunpowder out of their lungs. If the enemy ship struck its colors then, the fight ended. But if it didn't, the real danger began. Pirates closed the distance fast. They turned their ship so close that the hulls nearly scraped. Then grappling hooks flew through the air, metal claws biting into railings and rigging. The two ships locked together, refusing to drift apart. This was the moment everyone felt in their bones. The heartbeat at the edge of boarding, cutlasses drawn, pistols cocked, axes ready to smash through barricades, voices rising into a roar that mixed with the wind and cannon smoke. Yet inside that chaos, there was a strange sort of unity. Pirates fought together not because a king commanded it, but because every man depended on the next for survival. The ship was their world, their freedom, their share of future gold. If one fell, everyone's odds shrank. And they knew something the merchant crews rarely understood. Pirates didn't seek massacre. They sought surrender. Quicker surrender meant fewer wounds, less blood, more loot. It kept powder dry and tools intact. So the boarding parties moved fast and loud, screaming not out of rage but out of strategy, trying to overwhelm before a true fight began. If a crew panicked enough to drop its weapons, victory could come in under a minute. And if battle did break out, it was brief, brutal, and unforgiving. But historically, most captured crews gave up once pirates crossed the rail. They'd heard the stories. They knew resistance only made things worse. The moment the enemy captain surrendered, everything changed again. Noise fell away. Weapons lowered. Men caught their breath, leaning against rails slippery with seawater and powder. The adrenaline drained from their limbs. And in that strange, quiet aftermath, the sea returned, lapping, steady, almost soothing. This rhythm, fear, chaos, surrender, silence, was the real pulse of pirate life. They lived on the thin edge between survival and death, between luck and disaster. Every battle could be their last. Every surrender could be their next fortune. And they never knew which one waited at the next sunrise. After the roar of a battle faded and the conquered ship lay secured beside them, pirates entered a phase that was neither triumph nor rest. It was something heavier, quieter, an aftermath shaped by exhaustion, smoke, and the weight of choices that could not be undone. The deck was a strange place in those hours. The salty haze from burned powder still hung in the air, drifting in pale ribbons around men whose arms trembled from effort. The boards were soaked with seawater where buckets had been thrown to wash away blood. Cannons sat still and hot, glowing faintly like beasts cooling down after rage. The first order was to check for wounded. This task fell not to surgeons, because most pirate ships had none, but to whoever had the steadiest hands. Some men carried old battlefield experience from armies they deserted. Others learned by necessity, stitching wounds with sailmakers' needles or cauterizing cuts with heated iron. It wasn't clean. It wasn't scientific. But it was survival. A man with a musket ball lodged in his thigh might bite down on leather, and let two crewmates hold him steady while another used a small knife to widen the wound and fish for the lead. There were no anesthetics beyond rum. Too much dulled pain but risked unconsciousness. Too little simply sharpened it. Infection was the true killer, creeping into wounds days later, sometimes taking limbs, sometimes entire lives. Pirates knew this well, and yet they stepped into battles repeatedly, because danger was the cost of freedom. Around them, others worked through the spoils with a practical rhythm. Chests were opened, crates lifted, barrels pried apart. They made piles of everything valuable: metal, coin, cloth, sugar, spices, tools, sorting them in broad daylight while the defeated crew sat guarded on the other deck. No man was allowed to pocket anything privately. Pirate law was strict about that. Theft from the crew was theft from the family, and punishments were immediate and harsh. Only the captain and quartermaster oversaw this process directly. Neither touched the loot. Neither took more than their agreed share. A pirate captain earned respect not through wealth or birth, but through fairness. A greedy leader could spark a mutiny faster than a storm tore a sail. When the piles were counted, when every last item had been tallied, the shares were distributed. This was one of the most democratic parts of pirate life. Each man knew exactly what he would get, whether a full share, a half share, or a special bonus for dangerous roles like gunners or carpenters. Even boys, even the injured, received something. And a strange peace settled over the crew when coins finally clinked into hands. A kind of deep, bone-level satisfaction. Not greed, relief. Relief that the fight had been worth it. Relief that their risks had purchased time. Time in port. Time to drink. Time to live like kings for a few weeks before the sea, once again, called them back. When the captured crew was released or dropped at the nearest port, because most pirates did not kill needlessly, the ship returned to its own rhythm. The battle felt like a memory fading too fast, washed away with the tide. But traces lingered. Cannons still smelled of fire. Splinters lay in corners missed by hurried brooms. Ropes burned by sparks needed replacing. And under all of it, men tried not to think too deeply about how close death had come. Nightfall after battle was the quietest part. Lanterns glowed dim against the vast dark sea, their light rocking gently with the ship's slow sway. Some men sat together on the deck, sharing stories in low voices. Others retreated alone, staring at the water as if it might answer whatever troubled them. Pirates were not fearless. They were simply accustomed to living with fear. When you slept over deep black water, when storms could take you in minutes, when bullets whistled past your ear days earlier, life became something fragile, precious, unpredictable. It was in these nights that men talked about home, about the wives they left, the brothers they lost, the farms they abandoned, the prisons they escaped. They spoke softly, not because they feared judgment, but because the sea amplified quiet emotions in a way dry land never could. A whisper felt heavier on the waves. Then, slowly, the mood changed again. Someone would hum a tune. Another would pass a tin cup of rum. Laughter would rise in warm pockets around the deck. Small at first, but growing. They weren't celebrating violence. They were celebrating survival. Celebrating the fragile truth that they were still alive in a world that constantly tried to take them. As the ship drifted under the stars, its sails slack in the evening breeze, the crew settled into a rhythm almost like meditation. The ocean rocked them gently, the boards beneath their bodies warm from the sun's memory. They weren't thinking of the next battle or the next storm or the next port. They were simply existing, simple, breathing, momentary peace. And sometimes, on rare and fragile nights, even the captain would step aside, lower himself onto the deck, lean back against a coil of rope, and let the sea breeze brush over his face. He'd close his eyes and listen. To the water, to the timbers, to the slow, steady breaths of men who trusted him with their lives. Pirate life was brutal, yes. Dangerous, absolutely. Short often. But in moments like these, it carried a kind of serenity no law-abiding sailor ever understood. A freedom so complete it bordered on unreal. They had chosen this life. With every battle, every risk, every shifting wind, they chose it again. And now, as the lanterns dimmed and the stars grew sharper in the sky, the sea whispered its ancient lullaby. Deep, soft, endless. This is where the story leaves them. Not in victory, not in death, but in the quiet in-between, where the waves cradle the ship, and the darkness feels safe, and time no longer pushes forward so fast. If your eyes feel heavy, let them fall shut. If your breath feels tight, let it grow long and slow. Let your mind drift with the ship, the deck warm beneath you, the ocean breathing steady beside you, your thoughts floating like lantern light over calm water. Just rest for a moment. You're safe here. You've reached the quiet part of the sea.